I read her text once. Set my phone face down on the kitchen table. Walked to the stove. Turned off the soup I had been cooking for my son since 5:30 that morning. Then I picked up my phone again, not to call Nathan, not to reply to Claire, but to dial my real estate broker. Marianne, I said, when she answered. Remember that buyer who wanted the property last year? Yes, call him today. I'm ready to sell. I hung up. Sat back down at my kitchen table. Finished my coffee. By the time Nathan pulled into the driveway that evening, I was already gone. And if you're watching this from somewhere in America tonight, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. No one has told you recently that your time still matters, and your worth is not measured by what you sacrifice. Stay with me. Subscribe to this channel. Because what I'm about to tell you is for every single one of us who has ever made themselves small so someone else could feel large. Let me tell you what that text actually said, because I think people imagine it was something vicious, something cruel and obvious, the kind of message you could screenshot and show someone, and they would immediately understand why you did what you did. Wasn't like that. That's almost what made it worse. It came in at 8:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I have thought about that Tuesday in March so many times since that I can replay every minute of it like a film I've seen too many times. I was sitting at my kitchen table. My coffee was still hot. The seed catalog I'd been reading was open to the tomato section. Through the window above the sink, I could see the bird feeder Gerald had hung from the maple tree the spring before he got sick. A chickadee was working at the seeds with great concentration, completely unbothered by the world. My phone buzzed once, a text from Claire. I picked it up the way I always picked up my phone when Claire texted, with the reflex of a woman on permanent call. Quickly. Ready. I read it. Evelyn, so I wanted to let you know we've been talking, and the plan for the cruise has changed a little. We've decided we want this trip to be just us, our immediate family, the four of us. Kids are getting older, and we really feel like they need this kind of dedicated family time with just Nathan and me. We're going to use the extra cabin for the kids to have more space. I know this is last minute, and I know you'll understand. Thanks so much for all your help with the planning. I read it once. I read it again. Then I set the phone face down on the table. Picked up my coffee cup with both hands. And sat very still. Immediate family. That's what she wrote. Immediate family. Those two words sat in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. Not an explosion. Just a weight. Sinking slowly. Disturbing everything on the way down. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a woman who acts out of anger. I never have been. I've had a quiet life. A patient life, some might say too patient, and in 68 years of living, I have never once made a decision from a place of rage. I have swallowed things that would have made other women throw plates. I have smiled through conversations that deserved tears. I have absorbed and adjusted and rearranged myself around other people's needs for so long that I had, somewhere along the way, almost entirely forgotten what my own felt like. So when I tell you what I did next, I need you to understand it did not come from anger. It came from clarity. The sudden, total, devastating clarity of a woman who has just seen something true about her life for the very first time. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 68 years old. I had lived in my house on a quiet road outside Portland, Oregon for 31 years. My husband Gerald and I bought it young, when Nathan was still in diapers, when we were still the kind of people who believed that a good house and a good life were more or less the same thing. Gerald passed away 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, so fast that I still sometimes reach for him in the middle of the night and am surprised by the empty space. After Gerald died, I rattled around that house alone for about 4 months. It was too big and too quiet, and everywhere I looked I saw him in the floors he'd refinished. Angelus. In the kitchen window he'd replaced because I mentioned once that I liked watching the birds while I did the dishes. Angelus. In the back porch he'd extended so I'd have somewhere to sit on summer evenings. So when Nathan came to me in the spring after Gerald's death and said that he and Claire were looking for a place, Angelus, that their lease was ending, Angelus, that the market was brutal, Angelus, that it would only be for a few months, I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. Angelus, because I was lonely, because the house felt like a wound. Angelus, because I wanted, Angelus, more than almost anything, Angelus, to hear it full of people again. Angelus, that was 6 years ago. Angelus, the few months became a year. The year became several. And somewhere in that slow accumulation of time, Angelus, the shape of my life changed completely so gradually, Angelus, so incrementally, Angelus, that I barely noticed it happening until I looked up one day and found that I had become something I hadn't chosen to be. Angelus, I need to tell you about Claire. Not to make you hate her, Angelus. I'm not interested in building a villain. I'm interested in telling you the truth, Angelus, because the truth is more complicated than a villain. Angelus, Claire is 38 years old. She is smart and organized and relentlessly put together in a way I always admired even when it made me feel slightly inadequate. Angelus, perfect nails. Angelus, expensive perfume. Angelus, hair that looks like she lives 20 minutes from a salon. She runs her household, my household, Angelus, I should say, Angelus, though the distinction had quietly blurred with the efficiency of a project manager. Angelus, she is not, Angelus, by nature, Angelus, a cruel person. Angelus, I want to be clear about that. Angelus, but she had developed, Angelus, over the years, Angelus, a particular habit. A habit so subtle I didn't have a name for it until much later, Angelus, when I finally had the distance to see it plainly. Claire had a way of making you feel grateful for things that were actually your own. Angelus, let me give you an example. Angelus, about 2 years after they moved in, Angelus, Claire decided to redecorate the living room. She asked me one evening if I'd be all right with her freshening things up a little. Angelus, I said of course. Angelus, she had good taste and the room could use some life. Angelus, over the following weeks, Angelus, my furniture was replaced piece by piece with things Claire had chosen. Angelus, a new sofa. Angelus, new curtains. Angelus, new rugs. The mantelpiece where I had kept my photographs for 30 years. Angelus, pictures of Gerald. Angelus, of Nathan as a boy. Angelus, of my parents on their wedding day was cleared and rearranged with decorative objects she'd bought online. Angelus, very tasteful. Angelus, very Claire. She showed me the finished room one afternoon with genuine excitement. Angelus, doesn't it feel so much better, she said. Angelus, so much more open. Angelus, and I said, Angelus, it looks beautiful, Claire, because it did look beautiful. And because I had already moved my photographs upstairs without saying a word and told myself that flexibility was a virtue. Angelus, my office became a storage room. My garden, the one I had tended for 20 years, became a project Claire's landscaper overhauled one spring while I was visiting a friend. Angelus, when I came back, Angelus, my roses were gone, and there was a new stone path running through what used to be my herb beds. Kids kept tripping on the uneven ground, Angelus, Claire explained. Angelus, I thought the path would be safer. You don't mind, do you? Angelus, I said I didn't mind. I cooked their dinners. I drove the children to school 3 mornings a week. I helped Becca with her reading every evening for 2 years until she went from struggling to soaring. Angelus, I made Jonah's Halloween costumes by hand. I sat with Nathan when his back was bad and brought him soup. Angelus, I paid the property taxes quietly. Angelus, I covered the utilities quietly. I added money to a household account every month, a number that had grown, Angelus, without any formal discussion, Angelus, as their life expanded around mine. I did all of this because I loved them, and because being needed felt so much like being loved that I had stopped noticing the difference. But I remember the night I should have noticed. Angelus, it was a Sunday, Angelus, about a year ago. Nathan's colleagues had come for dinner, 3 couples, Angelus. Good people, Angelus, the kind of guests who fill a house with noise and laughter. Angelus, I had spent the entire day cooking. Angelus, a real meal pot roast. Angelus, 2 sides. Angelus, a pie from scratch. Angelus. Claire floated through the evening like a host. Angelus. She opened wine. Angelus. She laughed. Angelus. She steered conversation. She was charming in the way she always was when there were people to perform for. Angelus. At some point during dinner, Angelus, one of the wives turned to Claire and said, Angelus, "This is all incredible. Did you make all of this yourself?" Angelus. And Claire smiled and said, Angelus, "We put it together this afternoon." Angelus. It was a whole thing. Angelus. We. Angelus. I was standing in the kitchen doorway. Angelus. Still holding a serving dish. We. Angelus. Nathan heard it. He looked up from across the table and glanced at me for just a moment. Angelus. He said nothing. I walked back into the kitchen and finished serving the meal. Angelus. I told myself it didn't matter. Angelus. I was wrong. Now let me tell you about the cruise. Angelus. The cruise was my idea. Angelus. I want to be honest about that. I brought it up at Thanksgiving. I had been reading about Alaskan sailings for years. Angelus. The glaciers and the wildlife and the long blue evenings in the summer midnight sun. Gerald and I had always talked about going. Angelus. We never made it. Angelus. What if we went together? Angelus. I said at the Thanksgiving table. Angelus. All of us. Before the kids are too old to think spending a week with their grandmother is anything other than torture. Angelus. Becca laughed. Jonah knocked his juice over, reaching across the table with excitement. Nathan looked at me over the candles with his father's eyes and said, "Mom." Angelus. Let's actually do it. Angelus. Even Claire smiled. Angelus. A real one. Angelus. So I planned it. Angelus. 3 months. Angelus. I gave it. Angelus. I researched ships. Angelus. Compared itineraries. Angelus. Read reviews. Angelus. Called a travel agent twice. I found a sailing in August with 5 cabins together on the same deck, so none of us would be far from the others. Angelus. I paid the deposit. Angelus. $4,200. Angelus. I paid it without hesitation. Angelus. Because to me it wasn't a payment. It was a declaration. Angelus. This is what it's all for. Cooking and the driving and the money and the years of making myself useful, it builds toward this. Toward mornings watching glaciers with my grandchildren. Angelus. Toward being a family. Angelus. I believed that. Angelus. Completely. Angelus. Right up until 8:14 on a Tuesday morning in March. Angelus. After I read Claire's text. Angelus. I sat at my kitchen table for about 10 minutes. Angelus. Then I called Nathan. Angelus. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Mom, casual." Angelus. Relaxed. The voice of a man who has no idea. Angelus. Nathan. Did you know Claire was sending me that message? Angelus. A pause. Angelus. The briefest pause. Angelus. But I have been his mother for 41 years. Angelus. I know every register of his silences. She mentioned she was going to reach out. Yeah. Angelus. And you agreed with it. Angelus. This was a joint decision. Angelus. Another pause. Angelus. Longer. Mom, we just felt like the kids are at an age where they really need. Angelus. Nathan. I kept my voice level. Angelus. Did you agree with it? Angelus. Yes or no? Angelus. He exhaled. Angelus. We thought it was probably for the best. Angelus. We. Angelus. Again. Angelus. That word. Angelus. Okay, I said. Angelus. Mom, it's not personal. Angelus. You understand that, right? It's just that. Angelus. It's fine. Angelus. Nathan, I said. Angelus. I understand completely. Angelus. And I hung up. I want you to sit with what just happened there for a moment. Angelus. My son knew. He knew his wife was sending a text to remove me, the woman who paid the deposit. Angelus. Who planned the trip. Angelus. Who lives in the house they sleep in. Angelus. Who has been carrying their life on my back for 6 years from a vacation I organized and funded. Angelus. He knew. Angelus. He said nothing to stop it. Angelus. And when I called him, Angelus, his first instinct was not to apologize. Angelus. It was to explain. We thought it was probably for the best. I sat at the table for another moment after I hung up. Angelus. Then I stood up. Angelus. Walked to the stove. Looked at the pot of chicken soup I'd started at 5:30 because Nathan had mentioned his back was bothering him. Angelus. I turned off the burner. I carried the pot to the sink and poured it down the drain. Not dramatically. Not with anger. The way you pour out something that has gone cold and there's no longer any reason to keep it. Angelus. Then I walked to my study. I keep my important documents in a gray fireproof box on the top shelf of my closet. I've kept them there for as long as I can remember, a habit from Gerald, who was meticulous about paperwork in a way I always teased him about. Opened the box and took out the house deed. My name. Only my name. Just as it had been for 31 years. I held it in both hands. Nathan had said something to me 2 years ago, when I'd mentioned half-jokingly that I might want to downsize someday. He'd laughed and shaken his head and said, Mom, this house is our home. You can't just sell it out from under us. Our home. I had laughed too. I'd said I wasn't going anywhere. I thought about that now. Our home. I looked at my name on the deed. This was not our home. This was my home. And I could do with it exactly what I chose. I went back downstairs. Sat at the kitchen table. Opened my contacts. Marianne Lewis. 25 years in real estate. Sharp as anyone I've ever met. And one of the truest friends I have. About a year ago. Out of nothing more than idle curiosity. I'd asked her to look into an unsolicited offer I'd received from a developer who'd written me about the property. The location was desirable large lot. Quiet road. Excellent school district. The offer was well above market. I had said no at the time. I wasn't ready. I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. Evelyn, honey. I was just thinking about you. How are... Marianne, I said. Do you remember the developer from last year? The one who wanted the property. A beat. Of course I do. Why? Is he still interested? A longer beat. I believe so, yes. Evelyn, are you actually... I want to move forward, I said. Today. I want you to call him today. Silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The silence of a woman who knows me well enough to not ask unnecessary questions. Okay, Marianne said finally. Her voice was careful and warm. Okay. I'll make the call. Are you all right, honey? I looked out the window at the bird feeder in the maple tree. I think I might actually be, I said. After I hung up with Marianne. I did not waste time. I found the cruise company's number in my email. I called. I spoke to a pleasant woman named Angela. The reservation, all 5 cabins, was in my name. Because I had booked everything. Because I had paid for everything. Angela confirmed this before I'd even finished explaining. I'd like to cancel the entire reservation, I said. All 5 cabins, she asked. All 5, I confirmed. And would you like to rebook for a different... No, thank you. I'll find a different kind of adventure. I hung up, opened my laptop. For 4 years I had made automatic monthly transfers to a joint household account. It had started as a practical arrangement, help with groceries, with utilities, and had expanded, the way things do when no one names them or limits them, into something much larger. Nathan and Claire had built their lifestyle around that money the way you build a house around its foundation. They had never asked if it would always be there. It had simply always been there. I logged into my account. I canceled every transfer. All of them. It took about 25 minutes. When it was done, I closed the laptop and sat quietly in the stillness of the kitchen. I could hear myself breathe. Just that. The sound of my own breathing in a house that had been so full of other people's noise for so long that I had forgotten what quiet felt like here. I stayed in that quiet for a moment. Then I went upstairs to pack. This is the part people always find surprising when I tell the story. The packing took less than 2 hours. 2 suitcases and a canvas tote. That was it. I know what you're thinking. 2 suitcases. After 31 years in a house. Here's what I've realized. I had been shrinking in that house for years. Slowly, invisibly. The way things shrink when they're not given room. My belongings had been relocated, replaced, absorbed into the general household aesthetic until what remained that was entirely and unmistakably mine was smaller than I'd known. I took my clothes. Angelus, my jewelry box, the real one. Angelus, with my mother's pearls and Gerald's wedding ring that I wore on a chain at my collarbone. Books, the ones with my handwriting in the margins. Angelus, not the decorative ones arranged on Claire's shelves. My photographs, the ones from the mantel that I had quietly boxed up and moved to my closet 2 years ago when Claire refreshed the living room. Angelus, Gerald's watch. Angelus, a small watercolor painting a friend gave me for my 50th birthday. Angelus, the things with a soul. Angelus, everything else I left. Angelus, not out of generosity. Angelus, out of indifference. The rest of it had already stopped feeling like mine. Angelus, I wrote one note. Angelus, I didn't write an essay. I didn't list everything I'd done for them or catalog my grievances. I am not built for that kind of performance. I took a note card from the little basket on the counter, the one I used for grocery lists, and I wrote 8 words in my normal handwriting. Angelus, I hope you enjoy the life you built. Angelus, I set it on the kitchen table. Angelus, next to the coffee maker. Angelus, where Nathan would see it the moment he walked in. Angelus, then I picked up my keys. Angelus, walked through the house once without stopping. Angelus, and went out the back door. Angelus, it was 2:47 in the afternoon. I got in my car and I drove away from that house without looking back. Angelus, not because I didn't love it. Angelus, because I loved myself more. Angelus, I drove south. Angelus, no precise destination. Just a direction and a feeling that pulled me toward the coast, toward water. Angelus, toward open air. Angelus, toward the version of California I remembered from early in my marriage. Angelus, when Gerald and I had spent a long weekend driving the 101 and eating at roadside places and talking about the future like it was a country we were going to explore together. Angelus, I turned my phone off at the Oregon state line. The silence in the car was extraordinary. Angelus, no one asking me for anything. Angelus, no schedule to keep. Angelus, no version of myself required. Passed through towns I didn't know and didn't stop at. Sky went from gray to gold to the dark purple of early evening. Angelus, the road curved west, and then I could smell the ocean even before I could see it, that particular smell of salt and cold air and something ancient and indifferent to human drama. Angelus, somewhere south of Grants Pass. Angelus, I pulled off at a rest stop. Angelus, I turned off the engine. Angelus, and I sat there and I cried. I'm not going to dress it up or explain it away. Angelus, I cried hard. Angelus, the way you cry when something that needed to end has finally ended, and the relief and the grief arrive at the same time, and you can't tell them apart. Angelus, I cried for Gerald. Angelus, who was supposed to be there for all of it and wasn't. I cried for the version of myself I had packed into boxes in my own home. Angelus relocated upstairs. Angelus made smaller and quieter until she barely took up space. I cried for the soup I'd poured down the drain that morning. I cried for $4,200 and for 3 months of planning and for a word immediate that had drawn a circle around a family and placed me outside it. Angelus, I cried until I was finished. Angelus, then I blew my nose. Angelus, pulled back onto the highway. Angelus, and kept driving. It was dark by the time I pulled into a motel off the 101 near Crescent City. Angelus, California. Angelus, small place. Angelus, clean. Kind of motel that asks no question. The woman at the front desk had white hair and a cat sleeping on a stool behind her, and she handed me my key with a warmth that felt, Angelus, in that moment. Angelus, like more than I deserved from a stranger. Angelus, I carried my bags to the room. Angelus, I sat on the edge of the bed. Angelus, and I turned my phone on. Angelus, the screen lit up immediately and didn't stop. Angelus, 17 missed calls. Angelus, 11 from Nathan. Angelus, 6 from Claire. Angelus, a voicemail from Marianne. Angelus, Evelyn, honey. Angelus, the developer is very interested. Angelus, he wants to move quickly. Angelus, the number is good. Angelus, call me when you can. Angelus, I opened Nathan's texts first. Angelus, Mom, what happened to the cruise reservation? Angelus, the company says everything is canceled. Angelus, then, Mom, I'm trying to call you, please pick up. Angelus, then, Angelus, Mom, the bank account. Angelus, the transfers are gone. Angelus, what is going on? Angelus, then around 6:30. Angelus, we got home and you're not here. Angelus, where are you? Angelus, what does your note mean? Angelus, then Claire, Evelyn, this is completely unacceptable. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you cannot just cancel a family vacation without talking to us. Angelus, call Nathan immediately. Angelus, then, Angelus, Evelyn. Angelus, the transfers. Angelus, the bank account. Angelus, you need to call us right now. Angelus, I read every message. Angelus, all of them. Angelus, I set the phone on the bed beside me. Angelus, then Nathan called again. Angelus, I answered. His voice was different from the morning. Angelus, the ease was completely gone. Place was something younger, something that reminded me of the boy who used to come into my room during thunderstorms when he was 6. Angelus, Mom, where are you? Angelus, what's happening? I don't understand. Angelus, Nathan, I said. Angelus, I'm fine. Angelus, I'm safe. Angelus, I'm in California. Angelus, California. Angelus, Mom, you left. Angelus, your note. Angelus, I left because I needed to, I said. I left because that's what you do when you're no longer wanted. Angelus, that's not Mom, you're being dramatic. Angelus, the cruise reservation is canceled, I said. Angelus, all 5 cabins, since I booked them and paid for them. Angelus, I had the authority to cancel them. The bank transfers are also stopped. And I've spoken to Marianne Lewis about the house. Angelus, a very long silence. Angelus, what about the house? He asked. Angelus, quietly. Angelus, I'm selling it. Angelus, I heard him pull in a breath. Angelus, a sharp one. Angelus, Mom. Angelus, Mom, you can't do that. Angelus, we live there. Kids, Claire, where are we supposed to go? Nathan, that is a question I'm confident you can figure out. You're 41 years old. Angelus, you have a job. Angelus, you have options. Angelus, these are things adults navigate. Angelus, this is insane. Angelus, his voice cracked slightly. You're doing all of this because of one text. Angelus, no, I said. Angelus, I'm doing all of this because of 6 years. The text was just the morning I finally paid attention. Angelus, he went quiet. Angelus, I want you to think about something, I said. Angelus, this morning. Angelus, your wife sent me a message removing me from a trip I planned. Angelus, funded and organized, and called it a trip for immediate family. Angelus, you knew she was sending it. Angelus, you didn't warn me. Angelus, you didn't suggest she reconsider. Angelus, when I called you. Angelus, you explained it to me instead of apologizing for it. Angelus, that is what happened this morning. I want you to sit with that. Angelus, Mom, Angelus, I'm not finished. Angelus, I kept my voice even. I have lived in that house for 6 years as a guest in my own home. I moved my photographs when Claire wanted new decor. Angelus, I gave up my office for storage. Cooked your dinners and drove your children and paid your bills and did it all quietly because I thought that was what it meant to love people. Thought making myself useful was the same as being valued. Angelus, I was wrong. Angelus, and Claire's text this morning was the moment that became impossible to ignore. Nathan said nothing for a long time. Angelus, when he spoke. Angelus, his voice was low. Angelus, Mom. I didn't think about it like that. Angelus, I swear I didn't see it that way. Angelus, I know you didn't, I said. Angelus, I think that's exactly the problem. What do you want me to say? Angelus, what do you want me to do right now? Angelus, nothing, I said. I don't want you to say anything right now. Angelus, I want you to think. Really think not about the house or the bank account or the cruise, Angelus, but about how we got here. Angelus, how things became what they became. And I want you to have that conversation with yourself honestly, Angelus, without me there to absorb the discomfort of it. Angelus, a long, raw silence. Angelus, are you coming back? He asked. Not to the house, I said. Angelus, no. Angelus, Mom. Angelus, get some sleep. Angelus, Nathan, I kept my voice gentle. Angelus, because I did love him. Angelus, I have always loved him. We'll talk more when we've both had time to think. Angelus, I hung up. Angelus, I sat in that motel room for a long time after. Angelus, the window was slightly open. Could hear the ocean from somewhere not far below. Angelus, constant sound. Angelus, patient and indifferent. Angelus, older than any of this. Angelus, I thought about Gerald. I thought about what he would say if he could see this moment his wife sitting alone in a motel room on the California coast. Angelus, 68 years old. Angelus, having just sold the house and stopped the money and driven away from everything she'd organized her life around. Angelus, I thought he would say. Evie. Angelus, what took you so long? Angelus, Gerald used to tell me. Angelus, early in our marriage. Angelus, that I was the most generous person he'd ever met, and that someday I would have to learn that generosity without limits is not a virtue. Angelus, it's a door left permanently unlocked. Angelus, eventually someone stops knocking. Angelus, he was right. He was right about everything. Angelus, that man, and I never told him so enough. I lay back on top of the covers without changing. Ocean kept its sound outside the window, and somewhere in the space between one breath and the next, Angelus, something happened that I hadn't expected. Rising up through the grief and the exhaustion and the strangeness of that room in that town I'd never been to, I felt relief. Angelus, not the small, Angelus, temporary relief of a problem postponed. Angelus, real relief. Angelus, the bone-deep kind. Angelus, the kind that comes from a place so far down you didn't even know it was being held. The relief of a woman who has finally told the truth. Who has finally, Angelus, after 68 years, Angelus, acted as though her own life belongs to her. Angelus, I closed my eyes. Angelus, and I slept better than I had in years longer. Angelus, deeper, without the low-level alertness I hadn't even known I'd been carrying. Angelus, the constant low hum of a woman always listening for the next thing she was needed for. Angelus, for the first time in a very long time. Angelus, no one needed me. Angelus, and I discovered, Angelus, lying in that quiet room with the ocean outside the window. Angelus, that I was still entirely, Angelus, completely, Angelus, wonderfully here. What I didn't know yet was what would happen in the weeks that followed, what Nathan would do when the weight of it fully landed. What Claire would do when the comfortable structure of her life began to show the shape of what had been holding it up. Angelus, what I would find, Angelus, on the other side of all of this, Angelus, when I finally had the space and silence to remember who I was before I became everyone's answer. Angelus, I didn't know any of that yet, but I had done something that night that I hadn't done in more years than I could count. Angelus, I had chosen myself. Angelus, and whatever came next, Angelus, I knew with a certainty that had no anger in it, only a deep, Angelus, clear, unshakable calm that I would not be undoing that choice. Angelus, not for a house. Angelus, not for a bank account. Angelus, not for a cruise. And not for one more morning of making soup for a family that had quietly, Angelus, without ever meaning to say it out loud, Angelus, decided that I was something other than one of them. That was the night everything began. Angelus, not ended. Angelus, began. 'Cause disappearing from a life that no longer fits you is not the end of the story. Angelus, it is the first sentence of a new one. The next morning I woke up at 5:30. Angelus, the same time I had woken up every single morning for the past 6 years. Old habits don't care about new beginnings. Angelus, for one disoriented moment. Angelus, I reached for the edge of the bed to swing my legs over and start the coffee and check what time the kids needed to be at school. Angelus, then I heard the ocean. Angelus, and I remembered where I was. Angelus, and more importantly, Angelus, I remembered where I was not. I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling and let that feeling settle over me, that strange mixture of loss and liberation that I had no name for yet. Felt like the first morning after you've quit something that was slowly killing you. Angelus, necessary. Angelus, frightening. Angelus, irreversible. Angelus, my phone was on the nightstand. Angelus, I had 14 new messages since I'd fallen asleep. Angelus, I didn't reach for it right away. Angelus, instead I got up. Angelus, splashed water on my face. Angelus, and stood at the window for a few minutes watching the light come up over the water. Then I made myself a cup of coffee from the machine on the dresser, the kind that makes one cup at a time, Angelus, with those little pods, and I sat on the edge of the bed and I picked up my phone. The messages from Nathan had stopped around midnight. Angelus, the last one read, Angelus, Mom, I don't even know what to say to you right now. Angelus, I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the mattress and drank my coffee in silence. Angelus, and I thought about what I was going to do next. That was the first morning in 6 years I had thought about what I was going to do next, and meant only myself. Angelus, it was a strange and powerful feeling. Angelus, like a muscle you forgot you had. Angelus, suddenly remembered. Angelus, I called Marianne at 8 o'clock. Angelus, she answered immediately. Angelus, which told me she'd been waiting. Angelus, Evelyn, she said. Angelus, honey, I've been worried about you. Angelus, how are you doing? Angelus, where are you? Angelus, I'm fine, I said. Angelus, I'm in Crescent City. Angelus, I needed some space. Lord, you drove all the way to California. A pause. Angelus, then, gently. Angelus, are you sure about all of this? Angelus, I mean really sure. Angelus, because once we get this moving. Angelus, Nathan and Claire are going to need time to find somewhere to go and… Angelus, Marianne, I said. Angelus, tell me about the offer. Angelus, she exhaled. Angelus, all right. The developer came back in at 412,000, above what you paid for the property. Angelus, it's an exceptional number. Angelus, he wants to close in 60 days. Angelus, I set down my coffee cup. Angelus, 60 days. Angelus, what do I need to do? I said. Sign the paperwork when we get it drafted. I'll need you to designate a forwarding address for correspondence. And Evelyn, Nathan, and Claire will legally have 60 days from signing to vacate. Angelus, I understand, I said. They're going to be upset. Angelus, they're already upset, I said. Angelus, that part isn't going to change. There was a long pause from Marianne's end. Angelus, I could hear her breathing. Angelus, the way old friends breathe when they're choosing their words carefully. Angelus, can I say one thing? Angelus, she asked. Angelus, you can always say one thing, I said. Angelus, I think you're doing the right thing. Angelus, I've watched you for years, Evelyn. Angelus, years. And I've never once seen you put yourself first. Angelus, not once. I just want you to know that I'm in your corner. Angelus, whatever you need. I had to press my lips together for a moment before I could answer. Angelus, thank you, I said. Angelus, that means more than you know. Angelus, after I hung up with Marianne. Angelus, I sat in that motel room for another hour. I made a list on a notepad I found in the nightstand drawer, the kind of list you make when you're building a life from the ground up, and you have to decide what the foundation looks like. I wrote down everything I needed to handle in the next 30 days. Angelus, banking. Angelus, mail forwarding. Angelus, a temporary address. Angelus, a decision about where I actually wanted to be. That last item sat at the bottom of the list, and I stared at it for a long time. Angelus, where did I want to be? Question I hadn't asked myself in so long that it felt almost foreign. Like a language I used to speak fluently and had slowly stopped using until now all I had left were the basic words. Angelus, I knew one thing. Angelus, I was not going back to Portland. Angelus, not to that house. Angelus, not to that life. Angelus, and in the strange, Angelus, open, slightly terrifying freedom of that knowledge. Angelus, I felt something crack open in my chest, not painfully. Angelus, but the way a window cracks open in a room that's been shut up too long. Angelus, just air. Angelus, just light. Angelus, just the simple, shocking sensation of space. I checked out of the motel at 11 and drove further south. Angelus, I didn't know it yet. Angelus, but I was driving toward the place where I would eventually stop. That morning I wasn't ready to stop. Angelus, I just needed to keep moving. Angelus, moving felt like breathing. Angelus, my phone rang at noon. Angelus, Nathan. Angelus, I let it ring 4 times. Angelus, then I answered. Angelus, Mom, his voice was hoarse. Angelus, like he hadn't slept much. Angelus, are you still in California? Angelus, I am, I said. Angelus, are you coming back today? Angelus, no. Angelus, a long silence. Angelus, Mom, we need to talk about the house. Angelus, we need to, there are logistics. Angelus, Claire, she's really upset, Mom. Angelus, she cried last night. I want to tell you something about that moment. Angelus, about hearing that Claire cried. Because I think you might expect me to feel something sharp and satisfied at that information. Angelus, and I want to be honest with you, I didn't. Angelus, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something sadder and more complicated than that. I felt the particular exhaustion of a woman who has spent years managing other people's emotions and has only just started to understand what that cost her. Angelus, Nathan, I said. Claire being upset doesn't change anything. Angelus, she thinks you're punishing her, he said. Angelus, I'm not punishing anyone, I said. Angelus, I made decisions about my own life. Angelus, my house. Angelus, my money. Angelus, my time. Those decisions aren't a punishment for Claire. They're just mine. Angelus, Mom, 60 days. Angelus, Marianne said 60 days. Kids are in school. We can't just… Angelus, Nathan, I kept my voice even. You are a 41-year-old man with a job and a wife and resources. Angelus, 60 days is enough time to find housing. Many people have done it with far less notice. Angelus, this is unbelievable, he said. And his voice had shifted now. The vulnerability was giving way to something else. Angelus, something that sounded more like the tone Claire used when she was managing a problem. Angelus, you know what? Angelus, Mom, this isn't just about us. What you're doing affects Becca and Jonah too. Angelus, have you thought about that? Angelus, have you thought about what this does to the kids? Angelus, and there it was. Angelus, the children. Angelus, I had been waiting for it. Angelus, had known it would come. Angelus, the way you know a weather front is coming because you can feel it in your knees. Angelus, don't, I said. Angelus, don't what? Don't use Becca and Jonah to get to me, I said. Angelus, I love those children more than I can say. Angelus, you know that. But they are your children to provide for, Nathan. Angelus, not mine. Angelus, I am their grandmother. Angelus, and I love that role. Angelus, and I will continue to be in their lives if you allow it. But I am not responsible for the roof over their heads. Angelus, you are. Angelus, you and Claire. Angelus, that is what parenthood means. Angelus, silence. Angelus, heavy silence. Angelus, so that's it. Angelus, Nathan said finally. We just have to figure it out. Angelus, yes, I said. Angelus, that's it. Angelus, you just have to figure it out. Angelus, he hung up. Angelus, I kept driving. The thing about a hard conversation that you've finally had after years of avoiding it is that it doesn't feel the way you expect. I had always imagined that confronting Nathan would feel like relief and pain in equal measure. What it actually felt like was something quieter. It felt like setting down a bag I hadn't realized I was carrying. The bag was still there on the ground. Angelus, the things inside it were still real. Angelus, but my hands were free. Angelus, and I hadn't understood. Angelus, until that moment. Angelus, what it felt like to have free hands. Angelus, 2 days later. Angelus, I pulled into a small coastal town about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. I had been through this town once, Angelus, years ago. Angelus, with Gerald. I remembered almost nothing about it, except a feeling, the particular feeling of a place that wasn't trying to be anything other than what it was. Angelus, quiet streets. Angelus, salt air. Angelus, a pier. Coffee shop with fogged windows that smelled like cinnamon. I drove through it slowly the first time. Angelus, the way you drive through a place when you're not sure yet whether you're stopping or passing through. Then I turned around and drove through it again. And I pulled into the parking lot of a small motel on the main street and checked in for a week. The woman at the desk was about my age, late 60s. Angelus, easy smile. Angelus, the kind of woman who gives you the corner room without being asked because she can see you need it. You visiting, Angelus? She asked. I'm not sure yet, Angelus, I said honestly. She nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. Angelus, well, Angelus, take your time. Angelus, I liked her immediately. Angelus, that week. Angelus, I didn't do much. Angelus, I walked. Angelus, I ate at small local places. Angelus, I slept. I let the quiet work on me the way quiet does when you finally stop resisting it. Angelus, I called my doctor to transfer my records. I opened a new personal checking account at a bank in town. Angelus, I forwarded my mail to Angelus box. I did all the small practical things that add up to the beginning of a new life, Angelus, and each one felt less like a task and more like a declaration. Nathan called twice more that first week. Conversations were short and careful, Angelus, like two people walking on ice, Angelus, both aware of how thin it is, Angelus, neither wanting to be the one who cracks it completely. He told me they were looking at rental options. He told me Becca had asked where I was and he didn't know what to tell her. Angelus, he told me Claire was barely speaking to him. That last piece of information landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Because here is the thing about watching a marriage strain under pressure that you partially caused, even when the pressure was the right and necessary thing to apply, Angelus. Even when you know down to your bones that you made the correct decision, Angelus, there is still a grief in it. Angelus, Nathan was my son. Angelus, that marriage was his life. And whatever Claire's failures toward me, Angelus, she was the mother of my grandchildren, and I had no wish to see any of them suffer, Angelus, but I held what I knew to be true, Angelus, which was this, Angelus, I had not caused this problem, Angelus, I had merely stopped quietly absorbing it, Angelus, the strain in Nathan's marriage. Angelus, the scramble for housing. Angelus, the sudden confrontation with a financial reality they had been insulated from for years. None of that was my doing. It was the natural and inevitable consequence of a structure that had been built on something unstable from the beginning. You cannot build a house on someone else's sacrifice and call it a solid foundation. Angelus, eventually, Angelus, the person whose sacrifice is holding you up runs out of reasons to hold. Angelus, I had run out of reasons on a Tuesday morning in March. Angelus, when I read 47 words and understood finally what they meant about the way I had been seen. It was in the middle of my first week in that small coastal town that Claire called me directly for the first time. Angelus, I almost didn't answer. Angelus, my thumb hovered over the screen for 4 full rings. Then I picked up, Angelus, because I am not a woman who hides. Angelus, even when hiding would be easier. Angelus, Claire, I said. Her voice was different than I had ever heard it. Angelus, stripped of the polish. Careful performance of warmth that I had grown so accustomed to hearing that I had stopped registering it as performance. Angelus, she sounded tired. Angelus, and underneath the tired. Angelus, she sounded young, much younger than 38 in a way that caught me off guard. Angelus, I need to ask you something directly. Angelus, go ahead, I said. Angelus, do you actually hate me? Angelus, I sat with that question for a moment. Not performing the consideration, actually sitting with it. Angelus, actually checking. Angelus, no, I said. Angelus, I don't hate you, Claire. Angelus, then why are you doing this to us? Because I'm done doing things to myself, I said. Angelus, and the two had become inseparable. Angelus, a long silence. Angelus, the text, she said finally. You think I meant it the way you took it. Angelus, how did you mean it? I asked. Angelus, we wanted private time with the kids. Angelus, that's all. Angelus, it wasn't about you specifically. Angelus, Claire, I said. Angelus, I planned that trip. Angelus, I paid the deposit. I spent 3 months making sure every detail was right because I wanted to give our family a memory. Angelus, and you sent me a text. Angelus, not a phone call. Angelus, not a conversation. Angelus, a text. Angelus, 47 words. Angelus, and one of them was immediate. Angelus, and that word told me everything I hadn't let myself see for a very long time. Angelus, silence. You moved my photographs off the mantel, I said. Angelus, you turned my office into a storage room. You told your friends at dinner that you made the meal I had spent all day cooking. None of those things alone would have broken anything. All of them together, Angelus, for years, Angelus, without acknowledgement, Angelus, without anyone in that house ever stopping to ask whether I was all right with the shape my life had taken, and then a text removing me from a family vacation, Claire, Angelus, that is not a misunderstanding. That is a pattern, Angelus. I heard her breathing. I didn't know about the dinner thing, Angelus, she said finally. Angelus, her voice was quiet. Angelus, Nathan told me. Angelus, recently. Angelus, I didn't realize I'd said it that way. Angelus, I know you didn't realize, I said. Angelus, that's what I'm telling you. Angelus, that's the whole problem. Angelus, nobody realized. Because I made it very easy not to realize by never saying a word. Another silence. Angelus, longer this time. Angelus, are you really selling the house? Angelus, she asked. Angelus, the paperwork is already moving, I said. Angelus, and the money? Angelus, the transfers. Angelus, are stopped, I said. Angelus, yes. Nathan is he's trying, she said. And there was something real in her voice then, Angelus, something unguarded. He's been looking at apartments every night this week. Angelus, he's worried about the kids. Angelus, he's worried about you. He hasn't slept. Angelus, good, I said. And I want to be clear, I didn't mean that cruelly. Angelus, I meant it honestly. Angelus, I meant good. Angelus, he is finally doing what he should have been doing. Angelus, good, he is awake. Good, the worry is pointed in the right direction. That's what being a father and a husband looks like, I said. Staying up late figuring out how to provide for your family. Angelus, that's what it has always looked like. Angelus, he just never had to do it before. Angelus, because I was doing it quietly in the background. Angelus, Claire didn't say anything for a moment. Angelus, then, I want you to know something. Angelus, all right, I said. I never thought of you as less than family. Angelus, she paused. I know how that text must have looked. Angelus, I know the word I used. But I need you to know that wasn't what I intended. Angelus, I thought about that. Angelus, about intention versus impact. About the long, careful gap between what we mean to do and what we actually do, Angelus, and how the people on the receiving end of our actions don't live inside our intentions, they live inside what we actually did. Angelus, I believe you, I said. Angelus, I believe you didn't intend it. But Claire, what we intend and what we do are two different things. Angelus, I spent 6 years in that house meaning to be valued and experiencing something else entirely. Angelus, intentions are where things start. They're not where they end. Angelus, I heard her swallow. What would it take, she said. For you to, I'm not asking you to come back. Angelus, I understand that's not happening. But what would it take for things to be okay between us? Angelus, for you to have a relationship with the kids. Angelus, with Nathan. Angelus, with us. And this is the part of the conversation I had not prepared for. Because I had been braced for accusations and justifications and the particular maneuver of turning someone else's reasonable decision into your own injury. Angelus, I had not been braced for this. Angelus, for Claire. Angelus, stripped of her careful management. Angelus, asking a real question. Angelus, time, I said. Angelus, and truth. I need to see that you understand what happened, not just what I did in response to it, Angelus, but what happened over years that made it possible for a single text to end up being the last straw. I need to see Nathan become the man he's capable of being, Angelus, not because I'm there to carry him, but because he's finally carrying himself. And I need to know that when I am with those children, Angelus, I am their grandmother, not the help, not a convenience, Angelus, their grandmother. Angelus, a very long silence. Angelus, okay, Claire said. Angelus, her voice was barely above a whisper. Angelus, okay, Evelyn. Angelus, we said goodbye quietly and hung up. I sat alone in my motel room with the California coast outside my window, and I didn't know whether to cry or exhale or both. Angelus, what I felt, Angelus, sitting there, Angelus, was not triumph. I want to make sure you understand that. Angelus, this is a point I come back to often when I tell this story, Angelus, because I think people expect that the moment of confrontation must feel like winning. It doesn't, Angelus. It feels like surgery, Angelus, necessary, Angelus, costly. Something that will take a long time to heal. Something that had to be done before anything healthy could grow. Angelus, the call from Nathan came 3 days later, Angelus, in the evening. Angelus, but it was different this time. Angelus, the first thing he said was, Angelus, Mom, I owe you an apology. Angelus, a real one. Angelus, not an explanation. Angelus, not a justification. Angelus, an actual apology. Angelus, I waited. Angelus, I've been sitting with everything you said for days. Angelus, he continued. Angelus, about the 6 years. Angelus, about what I let happen. About the dinner party where Claire got credit for your food, and I looked at you and said nothing. Angelus, Mom, I said nothing. Angelus, I saw you standing in that doorway, and I let it go. Angelus, because it was easier. Because I always just let it go when it came to you. Angelus, because you never pushed back, and so I never had to. Angelus, and that's not love. Angelus, what I did. Angelus, what I allowed, that's not how you treat someone you love. That's how you treat someone you're taking for granted. Angelus, I pressed my fingers against my lips. Angelus, he kept going. Angelus, I called Dad's sister Elaine last week, he said. I needed to talk to someone who knew you before all of this. Before Dad died and you let us move in and everything changed. Angelus, and she said to me, Angelus, Nathan, your mother was one of the most vibrant, Angelus, independent women I have ever known. She had her own opinions about everything. Angelus, she fought for what she wanted. Angelus, she was fierce. Angelus, and I sat there and realized, Mom, Angelus, I don't know that woman. Angelus, I've never seen her. Because by the time I was old enough to pay attention, Angelus, you had already started making yourself smaller, Angelus, and I had already started getting used to the space you left. Angelus, I was crying by then. Angelus, not loudly. Angelus, just the quiet. Angelus, steady kind that comes from somewhere deep. Angelus, Nathan, I said. Angelus, when I could. Angelus, I'm sorry. Angelus, Mom, he said. Angelus, I'm genuinely sorry. Not because I want the house back or the money. Not because I want anything from you. Because I've spent a week really looking at what happened and I am ashamed of myself. And I needed to say that to you, without asking for anything in return. Angelus, I sat with his words in the silence of that room for a long time. Angelus, this is the thing about a real apology. Angelus, a real one. Angelus, with no strings. Angelus, no agenda. Angelus, no request hiding inside it. It lands differently than anything else in the world. It lands in a place that explanations and justifications and phone calls made out of panic can never reach. Angelus, it lands in the place where the actual injury happened. Angelus, and when it lands there, Angelus, something shifts. Angelus, not all the way. Angelus, not immediately. Angelus, but something shifts. Angelus, thank you, I said. Angelus, Nathan. Angelus, that means more to me than you know. Angelus, I found an apartment, he said. Angelus, 3 bedrooms. Good school district. We can move in at the end of the month. Angelus, we're okay, Mom. Angelus, we're going to be okay. Angelus, I know you will, I said. Angelus, and I meant it. Can we talk? Angelus, regularly. Angelus, can I call you? Angelus, you can always call me, I said. Angelus, that was never in question. Angelus, he was quiet for a moment. Becca keeps asking when she can talk to you, he said. Angelus, she drew you a picture. Angelus, she won't tell me what it is. She says it's private and it's just for you. Something broke open in my chest with a warmth I hadn't expected in the middle of all this hard weather. Angelus, I'll call her tomorrow, I said. Angelus, tell her to keep the picture. I'll want to see it in person. Angelus, really? His voice lifted. Angelus, of course, really, I said. Angelus, I'm her grandmother, Nathan. Angelus, that's not something that goes away. Angelus, that was never part of this. Angelus, after we hung up. Angelus, I sat in the quiet of that room for a long time. The light was coming through the window at a low angle, Angelus, the way it does in late afternoon on the coast when the day is ending and everything goes gold and soft and the world seems briefly, Angelus, perfectly, Angelus, to hold its breath. Angelus, I thought about Becca's picture. Angelus, about what she might have drawn. I found myself hoping it was something from the garden she used to sit with me sometimes on summer mornings while I weeded, and she would ask me the names of every plant, Angelus, over and over, Angelus, as though committing them to memory against some future need. Angelus, I thought about Jonah's laugh. Angelus, and I thought about this, Angelus, that love does not end when consequences begin, that you can hold your ground and still hold your people. That the hardest thing is not the confrontation, the hardest thing is trusting that something real can survive it. I had walked out of a house that no longer felt like home, Angelus, but I had not walked out on my family. There is a difference. It took me 68 years and 147-word text to understand it clearly, but I understood it now with the whole of myself. Angelus, 4 days later, Angelus, a week and a half after I had driven away from Portland, Angelus, I found a small furnished apartment 3 blocks from the ocean in that coastal town. Angelus, 1 bedroom, kitchen with a window that faced east, a little balcony where I could have a morning coffee without anyone needing anything from me. Angelus, I signed a 6-month lease. I sat in the empty apartment after the landlord left, Angelus, on the floor with my back against the wall because there was no furniture yet, Angelus, and I looked at the light coming through the east window, Angelus, and I felt underneath everything, Angelus, underneath the grief and the complicated love and the hard work of consequences I felt like myself. Not the version of myself that woke up at 5:30 to make lunches. Not the version that moved her photographs to make room for someone else's vision of beautiful. Not the version that poured her soup away quietly because the people she made it for had stopped treating her like she was worth the making. Angelus, just Evelyn. Angelus, just me. Angelus, still here. Angelus, still standing. Still entirely capable of choosing what came next. Pulled out my phone and I called Mary Ann. Angelus, I found an apartment, I said. Angelus, I'm staying. Mary Ann was quiet for a moment. Angelus, then she laughed. Angelus, soft and warm. Angelus, the way only old friends laugh. Angelus, good, she said. Angelus, good for you, Evelyn. Angelus, it's about damn time. I had been in that apartment for 11 days when the letter arrived. Angelus, not a text, not a phone call. Angelus, an actual letter. Angelus, handwritten. Angelus, in an envelope addressed to my box in handwriting I didn't immediately recognize. I stood at the post office counter and turned it over twice before I opened it. Angelus, with the particular caution of a woman who has recently upended several lives and is not entirely sure what form the fallout will take next. Angelus, it was from Elaine. Angelus, Gerald's sister. Angelus, Nathan had mentioned calling her. Angelus, but I hadn't expected her to write to me. Elaine and I had always been close in the way that in-laws can be close when the marriage is good warmly. Angelus, genuinely. Angelus, but with the understanding that the bond runs through someone else. Angelus, after Gerald died. Angelus, we had drifted. Angelus, not out of coldness. Angelus, out of the gravity of grief. Angelus, which pulls people into their own orbits and sometimes keeps them there longer than anyone intends. I read her letter, standing right there at the post office counter. Angelus, she wrote that Nathan had called her. Angelus, as he'd told me. She wrote that the conversation had shaken her. Angelus, she wrote. Angelus, Evelyn, he called me because he needed someone to tell him who you really are. Angelus, and I told him. I told him about the woman I watched his father fall in love with. The woman who had opinions about everything and was afraid of nothing, and who I always privately thought was the most quietly powerful person in any room she entered. Angelus, and then I cried. Angelus, Evelyn, because I realized that woman had gone somewhere, and I should have noticed sooner. Angelus, and I should have called. Angelus, I folded the letter. Angelus, put it in my purse, walked out to my car and sat in the parking lot and cried for about 4 minutes. Then I called Elaine. Angelus, she answered before the second ring. Angelus, like she'd been holding her phone all morning. Angelus, Evelyn, she said. Angelus, Elaine, I said. Angelus, and then we both just sat there for a moment. Angelus, across 800 miles of telephone wire. Angelus, 2 women in their late 60s who had let too much time go by. Angelus, and neither one of us needed to explain anything because we both already knew. Angelus, come visit me, she said. Angelus, when you're ready. Angelus, no timeline. Angelus, just come. Angelus, I will, I said. Angelus, and I meant it with my whole self. That phone call was the first of several things that week that reminded me the world is larger than any one family's drama, larger than 60 days and bank transfers and the logistics of a house sale, larger than the version of myself I had been shrinking into for 6 years. Angelus, there was still so much world. Angelus, and I had, Angelus, quite suddenly, Angelus, all the time I needed to find my way back into it. The apartment was slowly becoming mine. I had bought a few things, nothing extravagant. Angelus, a good coffee maker. Angelus, because I refused to compromise on coffee. A reading lamp for the corner of the living room where the light was best in the evenings. Angelus, a set of pots and pans. Angelus, because cooking has always been one of the things that settles me. Angelus, even when I am cooking for nobody but myself. Angelus, especially then, maybe. I had joined a gardening club that met on Thursday mornings at the community center 3 blocks away. I found it by accident. I had walked past the center on my second day in town and seen a handmade flyer in the window. Angelus, and something pulled at me. Angelus, some old instinct toward green things and good dirt. I walked in and put my name on the list without thinking too hard about it. Angelus, which was itself a new habit I was trying to develop. Acting before the internal committee could convene and object. The Thursday morning I walked in for the first meeting. Angelus, I expected to feel like an outsider. Angelus, I was new to this town. Angelus, new to these people. I had spent 6 years with my social world contracted entirely around Nathan and Claire and the children. Angelus, and I had forgotten, Angelus, a little, how to simply walk into a room full of strangers and be a person in it. Was a room of women and 2 men roughly my age, Angelus, all of them with dirt under their figurative fingernails and opinions about heirloom tomatoes, Angelus, and within 20 minutes I was deep in a conversation about the best way to winter over a rosemary plant, and I had forgotten entirely to feel awkward. The woman I liked immediately was named Dorothy. Angelus, 72 years old, Angelus, retired schoolteacher, Angelus, had been widowed herself 7 years ago. She had the particular quality of stillness that some people develop after loss, not sadness, Angelus, but a very clear sense of what actually matters and what doesn't. She looked at me with sharp eyes over her reading glasses on that first Thursday and said, Angelus, you're new. Angelus, how new? Angelus, about 2 weeks, I said. Running toward or running away? Angelus, she asked. Angelus, both, I said. Angelus, without hesitating. Angelus, she nodded like that was the correct answer. Angelus, sit next to me, she said. And that was the beginning of a friendship that I did not expect, and that turned out to be one of the most important things to come out of the worst morning of the previous year. Angelus, but I'm getting ahead of myself, because around the same time I was finding my footing in that coastal town. Angelus, something was happening back in Portland that I only learned about much later, and when I learned about it, Angelus, it changed the way I understood everything that had come before. It was the end of the 3rd week after I left when Nathan called me on a Wednesday afternoon, Angelus, and the first thing he said was, Angelus, Mom, I need to tell you something and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond. Angelus, I stopped what I was doing. Angelus, all right, I said. Angelus, Claire and I had a really bad fight, he said. Angelus, like a real one. Not the kind we have about schedules or money or whose turn it is to handle something. Angelus, a real one. Where things got said that things I should have said years ago and was too comfortable to say. Angelus, what kind of things? Angelus, I said carefully. Angelus, she blamed you, he said. Angelus, for everything. Angelus, she said you selling the house was vindictive, Angelus, and that pulling the money was abusive, Angelus, and that you never really liked her, and this was your way of finally showing it. Angelus, my jaw tightened. Angelus, just slightly. Angelus, and what did you say? I asked. There was a beat. Angelus, a significant one. Angelus, I said she was wrong. Angelus, Nathan said. Angelus, Mom, I told her she was wrong. I told her that you pulled back because we pushed you out. I told her that if either of us had actually paid attention to what your life looked like inside that house, Angelus, none of this would have happened. Angelus, I told her that the text she sent the way she sent it, Angelus, without talking to me first, Angelus, without talking to you, was the kind of thing you do to a neighbor you're uninviting from a block party, not to the woman who lives in the house and pays the bills and loves your children. Angelus, I sat down. Angelus, I didn't realize until I was already sitting that my legs had needed me to. She didn't take that well, I said. Angelus, no, he said. Angelus, she didn't. Angelus, she cried. And then she said something that I keep thinking about. Angelus, what did she say? Angelus, he paused again. I was always competing with her and you never noticed. Angelus, and Mom, I didn't know what to say to that. 'Cause I didn't know. Angelus, I genuinely did not know she felt that way. Angelus, there it was. Angelus, I sat with that for a long moment. Angelus, competing with me. Angelus, Claire, who had everything Nathan's love. Angelus, a beautiful home. Angelus, 2 healthy children. Angelus, years of quiet financial cushion had felt she was competing with me. With the woman who moved her photographs upstairs without complaint, who cooked and drove and paid and disappeared herself so thoroughly that there was barely anything left of her to compete with. Angelus, and yet, human beings are not always rational about what threatens them. And maybe what Claire had felt, whether or not it was fair. Angelus, whether or not it made sense, was the particular insecurity of a woman who could see, Angelus, even if she never said it, Angelus, that her husband's mother was the emotional center of the household. Angelus, that the children loved me, that Nathan still came to me when things were hard, that I was woven into the fabric of their lives in a way that no amount of new furniture or redecorated mantels could fully displace. She hadn't been trying to erase me out of cruelty. She had been trying to feel like she was enough in her own home. That doesn't make what she did right. Angelus, let me be very clear about that. Understanding someone's reason for hurting you is not the same as deciding the hurt was acceptable. But it changed the shape of the thing. Angelus, it made it more human and less monstrous. Angelus, and somehow, Angelus, that was harder to carry than the simpler version. Angelus, Nathan, I said slowly. Angelus, is she in therapy? Both are, he said. Angelus, we started last week. Angelus, together. I probably should have done this years ago. Angelus, he paused. There's a lot of stuff from before you that we apparently never dealt with. Therapist says that sometimes she says that when a couple has unresolved things between them, Angelus, they redirect that tension outward, toward anyone who's in the household, toward whoever is most available to absorb it. Angelus, I closed my eyes. Angelus, most available to absorb it. Angelus, that phrase sat in me like a stone. Angelus, because that was what I had been, Angelus, wasn't it, Angelus, for 6 years. The most available person to absorb whatever the household produced. Angelus, tension, overflow, Angelus, need, inconvenience. Angelus, I had taken it all in quietly, Angelus, the way a sponge takes in water, Angelus, until I was so saturated that one 47-word text was enough to wring me out completely. Are you okay, Angelus? I asked him. Angelus, with all of this, the therapy, Angelus, the apartment search, Angelus, the everything. Angelus, are you actually okay? Angelus, honestly, he said. Angelus, no. Angelus, but I'm better than I was. And I think better is the right direction. Angelus, it is, I said. Better is always the right direction. Angelus, after that call, Angelus, I sat for a while in the particular silence that follows a conversation that has rearranged something inside you. Angelus, I thought about Claire, about the strain, Angelus, sad geometry of her insecurity and my self-erasure and how the two had combined, Angelus, over years, Angelus, into something that damaged us both without either of us ever naming what was happening. I thought about the word that Elaine had used in her letter, Angelus, quietly powerful. Angelus, I had been that once. Before I decided that love required me to stop taking up space. And I thought, Angelus, what if I had said something? Angelus, not 6 years in. Angelus, not on the morning of the text. Angelus, but at the beginning. What if, when Claire first suggested refreshing the living room, Angelus, I had said, Angelus, of course, but the photographs stay on the mantel, Angelus, because those are mine and they matter to me, Angelus. What if at that dinner party, Angelus, when Claire took credit for my cooking, Angelus, Nathan had said, Angelus, actually, my mom made all of this, Angelus. What if 1,000 small moments earlier, Angelus, someone had told the truth? Angelus, we will never know. Angelus, that is the particular grief of hindsight. Angelus, you can see every fork in the road only after you've taken one of them. Angelus, what I knew was this, Angelus, I was not going back to silence. Angelus, not in this life, not ever again. Angelus, it was a Sunday, Angelus, 5 weeks after I left Portland. Angelus, when Becca called me for the first time. Angelus, not texted. Angelus, called. Her little voice came through the phone so clearly that it felt like she was in the room, Angelus, and my chest ached with something so specific and sweet that I didn't have a name for it. Angelus, Grammy, she said. That's what she'd called me since she was 3. Angelus, not Grandma. Angelus, Grammy. Angelus, hi, my love, I said. Angelus, Dad said I could call you, she said. I've been wanting to call for a long time, but he said you needed space, and I didn't totally understand what that meant, but I waited. Angelus, 11 years old, already more patient and more perceptive than half the adults in her life. Angelus, I'm so glad you called, I said. Angelus, tell me everything. Angelus, tell me everything I've missed. Angelus, and she did. Angelus, for 40 minutes, Angelus, Becca talked. About school and her best friend Maya and the book she was reading and the fact that Jonah had lost his second front tooth and now talked with a lisp that she found hilarious and also slightly annoying. Angelus, she talked about the new apartment, Angelus, which she had decided was actually pretty cool because her room had a window seat, Angelus, and she had always wanted a window seat. She talked about the way the boxes had all been packed and unpacked and how Dad had carried everything up 3 flights of stairs and was complaining about his back. She talked the way children talk when they've been waiting to talk, like a river that's been held back by something and is finally running again. Angelus, and then near the end of the call, Angelus, she got quiet for a moment. Angelus, Grammy, she said. Angelus, yes, sweetheart. Angelus, are you mad at us? Angelus, I closed my eyes. Angelus, no, I said. Angelus, I am not mad at you. Angelus, not even a little. Not even a fraction of a little. Angelus, are you mad at Mom? Angelus, I thought about that for exactly 1 second. Angelus, I was sad. Angelus, I said carefully. Angelus, I was very sad about some things. Angelus, but I'm working on that. Angelus, and none of it is about you or Jonah. You are 2 of the greatest joys of my entire life. Angelus, that will never, Angelus, ever change. Angelus, she was quiet for a moment. Angelus, I drew you a picture, she said. Angelus, your dad told me. What is it? Angelus, it's private. Angelus, she said primly. Angelus, you have to see it in person. Angelus, then I will see it in person, I said. Angelus, very soon. Angelus, promise. Angelus, I promise. Angelus, after I hung up. Angelus, I didn't cry immediately. I held myself together through the end of the call and through setting the phone down on the kitchen counter. Angelus, and then I let it happen. Angelus, not sad tears. Angelus, not exactly. More like the kind that come when something you were afraid you might lose turns out to still be there. Angelus, still whole. Angelus, still reaching for you across whatever distance you put between yourself and it. Those children were not the cost of what I did. They were the proof that I had done it correctly. Angelus, that you can draw a line without drawing a wall, that you can walk away from a situation without walking away from the people inside it. It was Dorothy who said something to me that Thursday at gardening club that I've thought about many times since. We were talking the way you talk in comfortable friendships that are still new enough to feel slightly thrilling about how we each came to be where we are. Dorothy had told me her story over several weeks, Angelus, in the way long stories get told in friendship, Angelus, a little at a time, Angelus, when it fits naturally into the conversation. She had her own version of a life reorganized by loss and her own version of the decision to start over in her 60s. That particular Thursday, she looked at me while we were both working on dividing a root clump and said, Angelus, can I tell you what I think happened to you? Angelus, please, I said. Angelus, I think you confused being needed with being loved, she said. And here's the thing about that, it's the most natural mistake in the world. Angelus, because when you're needed, Angelus, you feel essential. Angelus, irreplaceable. And feeling irreplaceable is the closest thing to security that some of us know how to reach for. Angelus, the problem is, Angelus, needed and loved are not the same. Angelus, people can need you and still not see you. They can require your presence and still take it entirely for granted. Angelus, and the moment you stop being useful, Angelus, the need evaporates and suddenly you discover what was underneath it. Angelus, I stopped what I was doing. Angelus, what was underneath it, I asked. Angelus, not because I didn't know. Angelus, because I needed to hear someone else say it. Angelus, whatever was always there. Angelus, Dorothy said simply. Which in your case, Angelus, sounds like it was nothing. Nothing had been built underneath the usefulness. Angelus, no real seeing. Angelus, no real knowing. Just the habit of having you there. Angelus, she paused. Angelus, that's not a reflection of your worth, Evelyn. That's a reflection of what they allowed themselves to build. Angelus, I sat with that for days. Angelus, weeks. Angelus, I sit with it still. Angelus, because she was right. And because it's a profoundly difficult thing to look at the possibility that you spent years inside a structure that mistook your function for your presence, that treated the things you did as though they were the same as who you are. I am not just the soup and the school pickups and the bank transfers. Angelus, I am Evelyn Parker. I have a life's worth of opinions and memories and longings and a way of seeing the world that belongs entirely to me. I have a laugh that Gerald used to say started in my stomach and worked its way up. I have a particular taste in books and a strong opinion about how a garden should be laid out and a capacity for friendship that I had nearly starved to death inside a life that didn't have room for it. Angelus, I had not vanished. Angelus, I had simply been invisible. Angelus, and those two things, Angelus, I was learning, Angelus, are very different. It was the 7th week when the first real crack appeared in Claire. Not the managed version of Claire that I had always known, the polished, Angelus, organized, Angelus, performance-ready Claire. Angelus, the actual one underneath. Angelus, she called me on a Thursday evening. I could tell from the first word she spoke that she had not planned the call, that she had picked up the phone on impulse, Angelus, the way you do when something is too heavy to keep carrying alone. Angelus, Evelyn, she said. I owe you something. Angelus, I waited. Angelus, I owe you a real apology, she said. Angelus, not the kind I gave you before. Angelus, where I was explaining myself while I was apologizing. Angelus, an actual one. Angelus, all right, I said. Angelus, I knew, she said. And her voice was tight with the effort of saying it. Angelus, when I sent that text, Angelus, I knew it was wrong. I knew you deserved a phone call at minimum. Angelus, I knew you had paid for that trip. Angelus, I knew you had planned it. Angelus, I sent a text anyway because I thought if I did it in writing, Angelus, I wouldn't have to hear your voice when you found out. I wouldn't have to deal with your reaction in real time. Angelus, it was cowardice, Evelyn. Angelus, plain cowardice. And I've been telling myself it was about the kids and the cabin space. Angelus, but it wasn't. It was about me not wanting to have a hard conversation. Angelus, and you paid for that. Angelus, literally and in every other way. Pressed my hand flat against the kitchen counter. Angelus, Claire, I said. Angelus, I'm not finished, she said. Angelus, the dinner. Angelus, when I took credit for your cooking. Nathan told me last week and I've been sick about it ever since. Angelus, I don't have a good explanation for that. I think I wanted to seem like the kind of wife and hostess who could pull something like that together. Angelus, and you had already done it. Angelus, and in that moment I let them think it was me. Angelus, and you were standing right there. You were standing in the doorway and I let them think it was me. Angelus, her voice broke on the last word. Angelus, just slightly. I have been, Angelus, she said more quietly. Angelus, really honest with myself these past few weeks. Angelus, about who I've been in that house. Angelus, about how I treated you. Angelus, and I'm not proud of it. Angelus, I'm really not proud of it. Angelus, this was the moment I had not anticipated. Angelus, this exact moment, Claire. Angelus, unguarded. Angelus, not managing the narrative or the impression she was making. Angelus, just telling the truth as directly and painfully as she knew how. Angelus, I had wanted acknowledgement. Angelus, I had needed it. Angelus, but now that I had it. Angelus, I found that what I felt was not relief exactly. Angelus, it was more like grief. Grief for the version of our relationship that might have existed if we had both been more honest. Angelus, years earlier. Grief for 6 years of small indignities that could have been conversations instead. Grief for the distance between who Claire was capable of being and who she had allowed herself to become inside the comfort of my silence. Angelus, I hear you, I said. Angelus, I'm sorry, she said. Angelus, Evelyn, I am genuinely sorry. Angelus, I know, I said. Angelus, and I meant it. Angelus, I believe you. Angelus, what do we do now? Angelus, she asked. Angelus, we go slowly, I said. We build something different than what we had. Something that doesn't require me to make myself invisible and doesn't require you to compete with a ghost. Angelus, we do it slowly. Angelus, with honesty. Angelus, and we see what it becomes. Angelus, she was quiet for a moment. Angelus, is that possible? Angelus, she asked. Angelus, after everything. Angelus, I don't know, I said. Angelus, but I think it's worth finding out. Angelus, don't you? Angelus, she exhaled. Angelus, a long shaky exhale. Angelus, yes, she said. Angelus, I do. Angelus, it was a beginning. Angelus, not a resolution. Not a bow tied around everything that had happened. Angelus, just a beginning. Angelus, which is the only honest thing a thing like that can be. Angelus, 3 days after that call. Angelus, something happened that I had not expected. Angelus, and that shifted the entire landscape of what I was building. Angelus, it was a Friday morning. Angelus, 10 minutes before I was supposed to leave for a walk with Dorothy. Angelus, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Angelus, I almost didn't answer. Angelus, some old reflex. Angelus, some instinct I couldn't name made me pick up. Angelus, is this Evelyn Parker? Angelus, a woman's voice. Angelus, professional. Angelus, careful. Angelus, it is, I said. Angelus, my name is Sandra Oates. I'm the director of a small nonprofit here on the coast. We run a program for older adults transitioning through major life changes. Angelus, divorce, loss. Angelus, relocation. We do workshops. Angelus, support groups. Angelus, mentorship. A mutual friend, Dorothy Whitfield, gave me your name. She said you might have something to offer us. Angelus, I sat down slowly. Angelus, Dorothy. Angelus, of course. Dorothy, who had known me for 7 weeks and had already seen something in me that I hadn't fully seen in myself. Angelus, what kind of something? I asked. Dorothy said you recently made a significant life change. Angelus, Sandra said. Angelus, under difficult circumstances, and that you did it with a clarity and a courage that she found remarkable. We have women coming through our program every month who are exactly where you were 8 weeks ago. Angelus, trapped. Angelus, invisible. Angelus, carrying everyone else. And we're always looking for people who've been through it and come out the other side. People who can sit with someone at the beginning of that journey and say, Angelus, I know where you are. Angelus, I know how this feels. And I know it doesn't have to stay this way. Angelus, I was very still. The morning light was coming through the east-facing kitchen window the way it did every day at that hour, warm and direct and full of dust particles that floated slowly in the air like something suspended between one moment and the next. Angelus, can I come meet with you? I asked. Angelus, I was hoping you'd say that. Angelus, Sandra said. Angelus, after I hung up. Angelus, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Angelus, not thinking exactly. More like listening to something inside myself that had been trying to speak for a long time and was only now finding the right words. I had spent 6 years believing that being needed was the same as mattering. I had built my sense of purpose entirely around what I could do for other people, Angelus, until the doing was all that was left of me, Angelus, and now, 8 weeks out of that life, Angelus, I was being asked if I had something to offer, not because of what I could carry, Angelus, because of what I had survived. That is a different thing entirely. That is not being needed for your function, Angelus. That is being valued for your experience, for who you are and what you have been through and what you now understand about how a person can lose themselves inside a life that wasn't built for them, Angelus, and how they can find their way back. Angelus, I texted Dorothy. You didn't warn me about Sandra Oates, I wrote. Her response came back in less than a minute. Angelus, I wanted to see if she could sell it herself. Angelus, she could. Angelus, couldn't she? Angelus, I laughed. Angelus, out loud in my empty kitchen. Angelus, by myself. Angelus, she could. Angelus, I typed back. Angelus, good. Don't be late for our walk. Angelus, I grabbed my jacket. Angelus, walked out the door. Angelus, let the morning air hit me full in the face. 8 weeks ago, I had been a woman sitting at a kitchen table reading a text message that told her, Angelus, in 47 words, Angelus, what she was worth to the people she had given everything to. Today I was a woman walking out her own front door into a morning that belonged entirely to her, Angelus, on her way to a friendship that had chosen her back, Angelus, toward a purpose that was finally about who she was instead of what she could provide. Angelus, the grief was still there. Angelus, I want to be honest about that. Angelus, the complicated love for Nathan. Angelus, the slow, careful rebuild with Claire. Angelus, the ache every time I thought about Becca's drawing and Jonah's lisping laugh and the distance between me and them that was necessary and painful in equal measure. Angelus, none of that had resolved itself. Angelus, none of it was clean. But underneath all of it, Angelus, running steadily like a current below the surface of a river, Angelus, was something I had not felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it when it came back. Angelus, myself. Angelus, just myself. Angelus, still here. Angelus, and for the first time in a very long time. Angelus, that was not the least important thing in my life. Angelus, it was the most. The meeting with Sandra Oates was on a Tuesday morning. Angelus, exactly 9 weeks after I had driven away from Portland. Angelus, I want you to notice that. Angelus, 9 weeks. The same day of the week it had all started on. Angelus, Tuesday. I didn't plan that. Angelus, but when I realized it, Angelus, sitting in my car outside Sandra's office building, Angelus, I sat with it for a moment. 9 weeks ago I had been a woman reading a text message that told her she was not family. Today I was a woman walking into a room because someone had decided she had something worth hearing. The building was small, Angelus, the kind of nonprofit office that runs on donated furniture and genuine belief in what it's doing. Sandra herself was younger than I expected, maybe 50, Angelus, with the kind of steady, Angelus, direct gaze that tells you immediately she does not waste her own time or yours. Angelus. She shook my hand firmly and led me to a small conference room and poured us both coffee without asking whether I wanted any, Angelus, which I appreciated. Angelus, Dorothy told me the broad strokes, Angelus, she said, sitting down across from me. But I'd rather hear it from you, Angelus, so I told her. Not everything, not all the details I've shared with you, Angelus, but the shape of it. Angelus, the 6 years. Angelus, the slow disappearance. Angelus, the text. The drive south. The apartment with the east-facing kitchen window. Angelus, and what it had felt like, Angelus, on the other side of all of it, Angelus, to start remembering who I was before I had become everyone's answer. Sandra listened without interrupting. Not the performative listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak. Angelus, real listening. Angelus, the kind that costs something. Angelus, when I finished, Angelus, she was quiet for a moment. How many women do you think are sitting in exactly the situation you were in 9 weeks ago? Angelus, she asked. Angelus, more than anyone wants to count, I said. Angelus, a lot more, she said. And most of them will never do what you did. Angelus, not because they can't, because they don't believe they're allowed to. Angelus, because somewhere along the way, Angelus, they absorbed the idea that their job is to hold everything together for everyone else, Angelus, and the moment they consider putting themselves first, Angelus, they hear a voice, their own voice, Angelus, usually telling them they're being selfish, Angelus, telling them good mothers don't do this, good grandmothers, good wives, Angelus, good women, Angelus, she paused. You did it anyway. Angelus, that's not a small thing, Evelyn. Didn't feel brave, Angelus, I said honestly. Angelus, it felt like the only thing left I could do. That's usually what courage feels like from the inside, Angelus, Sandra said. Angelus, she told me about the program. It ran 6-week workshops for women over 50 going through major transitions. Angelus, some were divorcing. Angelus, some were widowed. Some were exactly where I had been living inside a life that had been built around everyone else's needs until their own had become unrecognizable. The workshops covered practical things, housing, Angelus, finances, rebuilding a social life, but the part Sandra was most interested in expanding was the mentorship component. Women who had come through their own transitions and could sit with someone at the beginning of theirs. I'm not looking for someone to stand up and give a speech, she said. I'm looking for someone who can sit across a table from a woman who is terrified and exhausted and convinced she has waited too long, Angelus, and tell her the truth about what's on the other side. Angelus, I looked at Sandra across the table. Angelus, when do I start? I said. Angelus, she smiled. It was a real one. Angelus, 2 weeks, she said. We have a new group beginning. Angelus, 8 women. Angelus, the youngest is 54. Angelus, the oldest is 71. Angelus, what do I do? Angelus, the first session. Angelus, just listen, she said. Let them talk. And at the end, Angelus, if you feel comfortable, Angelus, tell them what happened to you. Angelus, not as a performance. Angelus, just as a truth. Angelus, I nodded. I drove home from that meeting with something in my chest that I kept prodding at carefully. Angelus, trying to identify it. Angelus, you press on a bruise to understand its edges. Wasn't excitement exactly. Angelus, it was more serious than that. It was the feeling of something fitting. Angelus, like a key turning in a lock you didn't know was locked. Angelus, and something opening. Angelus, and air moving through where there had been stillness for a very long time. Angelus, I called Dorothy the moment I got home. Angelus, she offered it to you. Angelus, didn't she? Angelus, Dorothy said. Angelus, before I could even start. You knew she was going to offer me something specific, I said. Angelus, you could have warned me. Angelus, if I'd warned you, Angelus, you'd have talked yourself out of it on the drive over. Angelus, Dorothy said. Angelus, completely unapologetically. Angelus, did you say yes? Angelus, I said yes. Angelus, good. A pause. Angelus, how do you feel? Angelus, I thought about it. Angelus, like something just started, I said. Angelus, it did, Dorothy said simply. Angelus, it did. Angelus, it was that same week, a Thursday. Angelus, 4 days after I met Sandra, that Nathan called me with something in his voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Something careful and young and slightly afraid. Angelus, Mom, he said. Can I tell you something that I've been trying to figure out how to say for about 2 weeks? Angelus, of course, I said. Angelus, he took a breath. I found something when we were packing up the house, he said. Angelus, in the back of the cabinet in your study. Angelus, a box. Angelus, I think it was Dad's. Angelus, I went very still. Angelus, what kind of box? I said. Angelus, a wooden one, he said. Angelus, dark wood. Angelus, small with a latch. I almost put it in the donation pile without opening it because I thought it was just I don't know. Angelus, decorative. Angelus, but I opened it. Angelus, he paused. Angelus, Mom. Angelus, there are letters in it. Angelus, a lot of them. Dad's handwriting. Angelus, my hand tightened on the phone. Gerald had kept letters in a wooden box. Angelus, I knew about that box. I had given it to him as an anniversary gift in our 3rd year of marriage, a small cedar box with a brass latch that I had found in an antique shop. Angelus, I had given it to him as a joke almost. Angelus, for your important things. Angelus, I had said. Angelus, he had smiled at me and said, Angelus, that's exactly what I'll use it for. Angelus, I had not seen that box since he died. Angelus, I had assumed it was somewhere in the house. Angelus, in one of the places I hadn't looked closely because looking closely at Gerald's things had been, Angelus, for a long time. Angelus, more than I could manage. Who are they to? Angelus, I asked, though some part of me already knew. They're to you. Angelus, Nathan said quietly. Angelus, Mom, there's a whole stack of them, dated going back years. The most recent one is from about a month before he got sick. Angelus, I sat down on the kitchen floor. Angelus, I don't know why the floor. I didn't consciously decide to sit on the floor. Angelus, my legs simply chose it. Angelus, Nathan, I said. Angelus, Nathan, I need that box. Angelus, I know, he said. Angelus, I know, Mom. Angelus, I have it. I've been holding it for 2 weeks because I didn't know how to tell you about it. I didn't know if it was the right time. Angelus, can you send it to me, I said. Angelus, overnight. Angelus, please. Angelus, I already have it packed, he said. Angelus, I was just waiting for you to ask. The box arrived the next afternoon. I signed for it at the door and carried it to the kitchen table and set it down and looked at it for a full minute before I opened it. Angelus, it was exactly as I remembered. Angelus, dark cedar. Angelus, brass latch. Angelus, worn slightly at the corners from years of handling. Smelled faintly of Gerald when I lifted the lid, that particular combination of cedar and old paper, and something underneath that I cannot describe except to say it was him. Angelus, it was unmistakably him. The letters were bundled with a piece of twine. Angelus, I counted them before I opened any of them. Angelus, 14 letters. 14, over what appeared to be the course of about 12 years. Angelus, based on the dates in the upper right corners. Angelus, the oldest one was dated March. Angelus, 12 years ago. Angelus, the most recent one was dated 6 weeks before he was diagnosed. Angelus, I unfolded the oldest one first. Angelus, I will not tell you everything Gerald wrote. Angelus, some of those words belong only to me. Angelus, the way certain things between two people always and only belong to them. Angelus, but I will tell you what I can. Angelus, because it matters to this story in a way I didn't fully understand until I was holding those letters in my hands. Angelus, Gerald had written to me about who I was. Angelus, not about what I did. Not about how I took care of him or the house or Nathan. Angelus, about who I was. The way I argued with him about books we'd read. Angelus, never backing down. Angelus, never conceding a point I believed in just because he was persistent. Angelus, the way I laughed. The way I walked into a room like I had every right to be there. Angelus, which he said was one of the first things he'd loved about me. Angelus, the way I stood my ground with my own mother. Angelus, who had been a difficult woman. Angelus, and never sacrificed my sense of self to keep the peace. He wrote in the letter from 12 years ago. Angelus, I have been thinking about what I love most about you. Angelus, and I keep coming back to this. You know who you are. You have always known, even when the world has tried to talk you out of it. I hope you never let anyone take that from you. I set that letter down on the table. Angelus, I picked up the one from 6 weeks before his diagnosis. Angelus, he wrote, Evie. Angelus, I have been watching you lately and I am worried. Not about your health or your happiness in the way I usually think about those things. Angelus, I am worried that you are beginning to disappear. Angelus, I don't know if you can see it from the inside. Angelus, but from out here I can see it clearly. You are making yourself smaller. I don't know if it's grief or exhaustion or just the long, slow pressure of having Nathan and Claire in the house. Angelus, but something is changing in you. Something is being compressed. Angelus, and I want to say before I lose the chance to say it. Angelus, because I am old enough now to know that chances should never be assumed that you are not a supporting character in anyone else's story. Angelus, you are the whole story. You have always been the whole story. Don't let them make you a footnote. Angelus, I put that letter down. Angelus, and I cried. I cried the way you cry when someone who is gone says exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. Angelus, across whatever impossible distance death puts between people. Angelus, and it reaches you anyway. I cried for Gerald, who had seen what was happening to me before it was even fully underway. Who had tried to say so with the time he had. Who had written it down in a cedar box and trusted that someday I would find it. I cried for the years between his death and that Tuesday morning in March when I finally did what he had already, years ago, understood I needed do. I cried until I was completely empty. And then I folded the letters carefully, put them back in the box, and closed the latch. And I said, out loud to nobody and to Gerald simultaneously, you were right. I'm sorry it took me so long. The silence in the apartment didn't answer. But it didn't need to. Nathan called that evening to make sure the box had arrived. It came, I told him. Are you okay? He asked. Quietly. With real concern, not the managed concern of a man navigating a situation. I will be, I said. Your father was a very wise man. I know, Nathan said. And his voice broke slightly on those two words, and we stayed on the phone together without speaking for a moment. Just being two people who missed the same man. He loved you so much. Mom, Nathan said finally. He used to tell me when I was a teenager and being horrible. You know how teenagers are, he used to say. Your mother is the realest person I have ever met. He said it like it was the most important thing in the world. Being real. Pressed my hand over my mouth for a moment. Told me something similar once, I said. I had forgotten. Don't forget it again. Nathan said. It was the most like his father I had ever heard him sound. 2 weeks after the letters arrived, I walked into Sandra's program for the first time. 8 women sitting in a circle of chairs in a room that smelled like coffee and the particular kind of hope that exists in places where people come to be honest about hard things. The youngest looked about Becca's age when Becca was grown mid-50s, dark hair with a streak of gray at the temple, eyes that were trying very hard not to show how frightened she was. The oldest was a woman named Ruth, 71, with the upright posture of someone who had spent a lifetime insisting on her own dignity. I sat in the circle with them. Sandra introduced me briefly not as an expert, not as a counselor, just as someone who had walked through something difficult recently and was willing to talk about it. I appreciated that introduction more than I could say. That first session. I mostly listened. The way Sandra had asked me to. What I heard was this. 8 different stories with the same architecture. The same slow disappearance. Told in 8 different voices. A woman who had spent 30 years as a caretaker for everyone in her family and could no longer remember what she had wanted to be before the caregiving started. A woman whose husband had died and whose children had immediately begun treating her like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. A woman who had given up her career for a marriage that had subsequently ended and now could not figure out who she was without either one. And one woman, the one with the streak of gray, whose name was Patricia, who said, very quietly, halfway through the session, I just don't know if it's too late. I'm 54. I feel like I wasted so much time already. I feel like the best of it is behind me. The room got very still. I leaned forward in my chair. Patricia, I said. Can I tell you something? She looked at me. 9 weeks ago, I said, I was 68 years old and I was sitting in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, reading a text message. And that text message was the moment I finally understood that I had made myself so small, for so many years, that the people I loved most had stopped being able to see me clearly. I had poured out everything I had for a family that had quietly, without ever meaning to be unkind, started treating me like furniture. I paused. 9 weeks ago I felt exactly what you're describing, like the best of it was gone. Like I had waited too long and used up my chance, and there was nothing left to do but keep going through the motions. I looked at her steadily. 9 weeks later, I have a new apartment, a new friend who I believe is going to be one of the most important people in my life, a clearer sense of who I am than I have had in 20 years, and I am sitting in this room. None of that existed 9 weeks ago. All of it exists now. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. How, she said. How did you start? With one decision, I said. One. And it didn't feel brave. It felt like falling. But I did it anyway. After the session. Ruth, the 71-year-old with the perfect posture, caught me by the arm on the way out. You said the right thing, she told me. To that young woman. The right thing. I hope so, I said. I know so, Ruth said. And there was a firmness in her voice that reminded me, suddenly and sharply, of Gerald. Of the way certainty sounds when it comes from experience rather than arrogance. We know so. Those of us who've already been through the fire. We know. She patted my arm once. Precisely. And walked away. Stood in the parking lot afterward for a minute. Just breathing. Then something happened that I had not expected. And that I want to tell you about carefully because it matters. My phone rang. Unknown number. California area code. But not local. I answered. Is this Evelyn Parker? A man's voice. Older. Measured. It is, I said. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm a literary agent based in San Francisco. I'm sorry to call out of the blue. I was given your name by a mutual acquaintance. A woman named Sandra Oates. He paused. I understand you recently went through a significant personal transition. A dramatic one. I frowned slightly. That's one way to put it. Sandra mentioned it to a colleague of mine at a dinner last week, he said. Not in detail, just the broad outlines. And my colleague called me because I have been looking for a particular kind of story, for a particular kind of project. A memoir. About women reclaiming their lives in the second half. He paused again. Would you be willing to have a conversation about it? I stood in the parking lot of Sandra's nonprofit office with the California sun on my face and a literary agent on the phone and the ghost of Gerald in a cedar box on my kitchen table. And I felt something so large and unexpected move through me that I had to be careful not to let it knock me over. Mr. Callahan said, I would be willing to have that conversation. I want to pause here and tell you something honest. I did not say yes immediately because I thought I had a great story. I said yes because in that moment I heard Gerald's voice, not literally, not the way I sometimes heard it in dreams, but in the way his wisdom lived inside me, quiet and persistent. His voice that said, you are not a supporting character in anyone else's story. A memoir. My story. My words on pages. In a form that could sit in someone's hands. I had been invisible for 6 years. I had moved my photographs off the mantel. I had poured my soup down the drain. I had been thanked for my help with the planning in a text that disinvited me from the trip I had planned. And now someone wanted to know my story. Not what I cooked. Not what I paid for. Not what I drove to or picked up or arranged or absorbed. My story. The one that had been happening inside me this whole time. Underneath all the usefulness. Called Dorothy that evening and told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, well, I suppose Gerald knew what he was talking about. How did you know about the letters? I said. I didn't, she said. But it sounds like he did. It sounds like he knew who you were going to need to be. Before you knew it yourself, a pause. Are you going to do it? The memoir. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I'm going to have the conversation. Good, Dorothy said. You have a lot to say, Evelyn. You always did. You just stopped saying it for a while. Conversation with Robert Callahan happened on a video call the following Thursday. He was exactly what his voice had suggested, measured, intelligent, the kind of person who listens with their whole face. He asked me questions for over an hour. About the house and Nathan and Claire and the text message and the decision and the drive south and the apartment and Sandra's program and Dorothy and the cedar box. He asked me. Angelus, when did you last feel entirely like yourself? Angelus, before all of this happened. Angelus, I thought about it. The day Gerald died, I said, not because his death made me feel like myself, Angelus, but because I was so focused on him in those last weeks that there was no room to be anything other than fully present. Angelus, I stopped editing myself. Angelus, I stopped managing how I appeared. Angelus, I was just there. Angelus, with him being real. I paused. Angelus, after that, Angelus, I think I confused grief with self-erasure. I think I was so lost without him that I made myself useful as a substitute for making myself whole. Robert looked at me through the screen. Angelus, that, he said quietly, Angelus, is the center of the book. Angelus, I did not commit to anything on that call. Angelus, I told Robert I needed time to think. Angelus, he said he understood. Angelus, and that he would be there whenever I was ready. Angelus, and that in his 22 years of representing books, he had rarely heard some speak about their own experience with such clarity and such absence of self-pity. Self-pity would have been easier, I said. Most things are, he said. Angelus, after the call, Angelus, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, thought about what it would mean to write a book. Put all of this into words that strangers could read, to make the whole of it, the soup and the mantle and the 47 words and the cedar box and the apartment and Dorothy and all of it, into something that existed outside of me. Something that could sit in the hands of a woman who was still sitting at her kitchen table reading a text that told her she was not family. Angelus, something she could hold and think. Angelus, someone else was here. Angelus, someone else felt exactly this. Angelus, someone else found their way out. Angelus, I picked up my phone. Angelus, I called Nathan. Angelus, he answered on the second ring. Angelus, Mom. Angelus, everything okay? Angelus, everything is very okay, I said. I need to tell you something and I need you to hear it without getting defensive. Angelus, can you do that? Angelus, a pause. Angelus, I'll try. Angelus, I told him about Robert Callahan. Angelus, about the memoir. About what it would involve telling the truth. Angelus, all of it. Angelus, including the parts that reflected badly on the people involved. Angelus, silence. Angelus, Mom, he said finally. Angelus, are you asking for my permission? Angelus, no, I said. Angelus, I'm telling you as a courtesy, because you're my son, and because I think you deserve to know. Angelus, another silence. Angelus, longer this time. Angelus, will you be honest, he asked. Angelus, about all of it. Angelus, about what it was really like. Angelus, yes, I said. Angelus, completely. Will you be honest about me? Angelus, yes, Nathan. About you too. Quiet for what felt like a long time. Angelus, okay, he said. Angelus, okay, I said. If your story can help someone, if someone reads it and decides to stop letting themselves disappear, then write it. Angelus, write all of it. Even the parts where I look like an idiot. Angelus, he paused. Angelus, especially those parts. Maybe I deserve to have them on record. Angelus, I pressed my hand over my eye. Angelus, you don't deserve that kind of grace. Angelus, I told him. Angelus, but I'm very glad you have it. Dad always said honesty was the only currency worth having. Angelus, Nathan said. Angelus, he was right, I said. Angelus, he usually was. Angelus, Mom. Angelus, yes. Angelus, I'm proud of you, he said. Angelus, I know that might sound strange. Angelus, coming from me. Angelus, after everything. Angelus, but I mean it. Angelus, I'm proud of you. It was the most adult thing my son had ever said to me. And I want to tell you it mattered. Mattered in the particular way that something matters when it comes from the person you were most afraid had stopped seeing you. Nathan had stopped seeing me for a long time. Angelus, he was seeing me now. And with something in his eyes, or rather in his voice, Angelus, through the phone that looked very much like the thing I had always been reaching for without knowing it had a name. Angelus, not gratitude for what I provided. Angelus, respect for who I was. Angelus, they are different things. Angelus, entirely different. And I had confused them for one another for most of my adult life. Angelus, it was the evening after that call. Angelus, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and the cedar box in front of me. Angelus, that I made the decision. Not just about the book. Angelus, about everything. about what the rest of this life was going to look like, Angelus, and who was going to be at the center of it, Angelus, and what I was going to refuse to compromise on, Angelus, and what I was going to give freely because I wanted to, and not because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I opened the cedar box, Angelus, took out Gerald's most recent letter. Read the last 3 lines one more time. You are not a supporting character in anyone else's story, Angelus. You are the whole story. You have always been the whole story. Angelus, I folded it. Angelus, put it back. Closed the latch. Angelus, then I opened my laptop. Angelus, opened a blank document. Angelus, and typed the first line of what would eventually become a book. Angelus, I typed, my name is Evelyn Parker. Angelus, I am 68 years old. Angelus, and until 9 weeks ago, Angelus, I had nearly disappeared entirely from my own life. I looked at those words on the screen for a long time. Angelus, then I kept writing. Angelus, and this time, Angelus, I did not stop. The book took 8 months to write. I want to be honest about what those 8 months looked like, Angelus, because I think people hear she wrote a memoir and imagine something romantic. Angelus, a woman at a beautiful desk. Angelus, words flowing like water. Angelus, the past arranging itself into something clean and meaningful on the page. Angelus, it was not like that. It was messy and painful, and there were mornings I sat in front of my laptop for 2 hours and wrote 4 sentences and deleted 3 of them. There were afternoons I called Dorothy and said I couldn't do it, Angelus, and she said, you can, Angelus, and I said no, Angelus, you don't understand, Angelus, some of this is too raw, Angelus, and she said that's exactly why you have to write it. There were nights I went to bed with Gerald's letters on the nightstand, and lay there in the dark, trying to figure out how to tell the truth about something without weaponizing it, without making a villain of anyone, Angelus, without making a saint of myself. Angelus, that last part was the hardest, Angelus, because the temptation, Angelus, when you are telling your own story, Angelus, is to smooth the rough edges of yourself, to remember your patience as more saintly than it was, to forget the moments when your silence was not only about generosity, but also about conflict avoidance. To leave out the times you saw what was happening and chose not to name it because naming it would have required something from you that you weren't ready to give. Robert Callahan told me in our second conversation, Angelus, the books that change people are the ones where the narrator is completely honest about their own part in what happened. Angelus, not self-flagellating. Angelus, not performing guilt. Angelus, just honest. The reader can feel the difference. Angelus, so I was honest. Angelus, I wrote about the years of swallowing things. And I wrote about the fact that swallowing them was a choice, Angelus, even when it didn't feel like one. I wrote about the particular seduction of being needed, Angelus, and how I had fed that need the way you feed an addiction quietly, Angelus, consistently, Angelus, in ways that made me feel essential while slowly eroding the self that was doing the giving. I wrote about Nathan not as a villain but as a son who had been allowed, Angelus, by my own silence, Angelus, to stop growing up. I wrote about Claire not as a monster but as a woman who had her own fears and her own insecurities and who had, Angelus, in the absence of any pushback from me, Angelus, allowed those fears to shape the household in ways that cost us both. And I wrote about Gerald, about the cedar box and the 14 letters and what it felt like to be seen, Angelus, across death, Angelus, by the one person who had always seen me most clearly. That chapter took me 3 weeks and I cried through most of it. It was during the 4th month of writing that something happened with Claire that I had not anticipated. Angelus, she called me on a Sunday morning, Angelus, which had become, Angelus, quietly and without either of us formally declaring it, Angelus, our regular call day. We had been talking every Sunday for about 2 months by that point. Calls were not easy, not yet, but they were real. We were building something new, Angelus, and new things are always somewhat uncertain under your feet, Angelus, like ground that hasn't fully settled. Angelus, that Sunday she said, Angelus, can I ask you something about the book? Angelus, of course, I said. Are you writing about me honestly? Angelus, I didn't hesitate. Angelus, yes. Angelus, a pause. Angelus, all of it. Angelus, the dinner, the text. Angelus, all of it. Angelus, another pause, longer. Angelus, I braced slightly. Angelus, the way you brace when you're not sure which direction a conversation is going to tip. Good, she said. Angelus, I blinked. Angelus. Good. I have been in therapy for 4 months, she said. And one of the things my therapist keeps coming back to is accountability. Angelus. Real accountability. Angelus. Not the performed kind. She says the only way through something is to look at it directly. Angelus. No softening. Angelus. No reframing. Angelus. Just this is what happened. Angelus. This is what I did. Angelus. This is what it cost. Angelus. She paused. Angelus. If you soften what I did in that book, Angelus, you'd be doing to your story what I did to you at that dinner party, taking credit away from the truth of it. Angelus. I sat with that for a long moment. Angelus. Claire, I said slowly, that might be the most remarkable thing you've ever said to me. Angelus. She laughed. Angelus. A short, slightly surprised laugh. Angelus. Like she hadn't expected to produce something remarkable. Angelus. Don't get used to it, she said. Angelus. I'm still a work in progress. Angelus. So am I said. Angelus. So is everybody. Angelus. That Sunday call was a turning point between us. Not a resolution. I want to be careful not to tie this up too neatly, Angelus, because the truth is that rebuilding trust between two people who have genuinely hurt each other is not a single moment. Angelus. It's 1,000 small moments. Angelus. Each one a choice. That call was the first one where I felt, Angelus, underneath the carefulness, Angelus, something that might eventually become genuine. It was also the call where Claire told me that she and Nathan had found a couples therapist they both actually liked, Angelus, which she described as a miracle on par with a solar eclipse. Angelus. He makes Nathan do this thing, Angelus, she said, where he has to say what he's actually feeling without explaining why he's feeling it first. Angelus. Just the feeling. Angelus. Straight out. No context. Angelus. No justification. Angelus. How's that going? I asked. Angelus. Terrible, she said. Angelus. He hates it. Angelus. Which means it's probably exactly what he needs. Angelus. I laughed. Angelus. Really laughed. Angelus. For the first time with Claire in longer than I could remember. Your father-in-law would have liked that therapist, I said. Angelus. Nathan says the same thing. Angelus. She said quietly. The first time I saw Becca after I left was 4.5 months in, Angelus, on a Saturday in late summer when Nathan drove down with the kids for the weekend. Claire didn't come by mutual unspoken agreement, Angelus. We all understood that some things needed to happen in stages. The children first. When the ground was steadier, Angelus, everything else. Becca got out of the car before it had fully stopped. She ran across the parking lot the way she used to run across my backyard in Portland when she was small enough that her whole body was still mostly momentum. Crashed into me and held on. Angelus. I held her back. I pressed my cheek against the top of her head and closed my eyes and just stayed there, Angelus, in that parking lot, Angelus, with the weight of her in my arms and the smell of her hair and the particular solidity of a child who is almost 12 and is all energy and bones and love. I made you something, Angelus, she said into my shoulder, Angelus, without letting go. Angelus. I know, I said. Your dad told me. He shouldn't have told you, she said. Angelus. It was supposed to be a surprise. Angelus. He told me it existed, I said. Angelus. Not what it was. Pulled back and looked at me. Angelus. Those gray eyes. Angelus. Wide and serious. Are you okay? Angelus. Grammy, she asked. Angelus. For real. Not like how grown-ups say okay when they mean complicated. Angelus. 11 years old. Somehow simultaneously the most exhausting and the most extraordinary quality in a person. Angelus. For real, I said. Angelus. I am actually okay. She studied me for a moment with the particular scrutiny of a child who has not yet learned to accept a satisfying answer when an honest one is available. Angelus. Then she nodded. Angelus. Good, she said. Angelus. Because I have things to tell you. Angelus. A lot of things. Angelus. I've been saving them up. Angelus. I want to hear all of them, I said. Angelus. It's going to take a while. Angelus. She warned. Angelus. I have time, I said. Angelus. I have all the time in the world. She took my hand and pulled me toward the apartment building with the specific urgency of someone who has been waiting 4.5 months to talk and is not going to waste another second. Angelus. Jonah was slower out of the car. Angelus. He hung back with Nathan. Angelus. Looking at me with the careful assessment of an 8-year-old who has been told something big happened and is still processing what it means. Angelus. I walked over to him while Becca ran ahead. Angelus, hi, buddy, I said. Angelus, he looked at me. Angelus, hi, Grammy, he said. Angelus, then, do you live here now? Angelus, for real, like not just visiting. Angelus, for real, I said. Angelus, for keeps. Angelus, he considered this. Angelus, do you have a garden? He asked. Angelus, not yet, I said. Angelus, but I'm working on it. Angelus, can I help? He said. Angelus, when we come visit. Angelus, can I help with the garden? Angelus, I was counting on it, I said. Angelus, he smiled then, the Gerald smile. Angelus, the whole chest one, and he walked toward the building. Angelus, and I stood there next to Nathan for a moment in the silence that children leave behind when they move on. Angelus, thank you for bringing them, I said. Angelus, thank you for letting us come. Angelus, Nathan said. Angelus, which was the right thing to say. We looked at each other. Who looked more like his father now than he ever had before, not in features, Angelus, exactly, but in the eyes. Angelus, in the steadiness of them. In the way he was standing there without needing me to fill any silence or absorb any discomfort. Angelus, just standing. Angelus, just being present. Different, I said. Angelus, I feel different, he said. The therapist says I'm making progress. I told him that was a very clinical way to describe what feels like learning to walk again. Angelus, that's exactly what it is, I said. Angelus, Dad would have had a lot to say about all of this. Angelus, Nathan said. Angelus, he already did, I said. Angelus, you just had to find the box first. Angelus, Nathan looked down for a moment. Then back up. Angelus, I'm going to do better. Angelus, Mom, he said. Not because I want something back. Not because I'm trying to fix what happened. Just because I understand now what I should have been all along. And I'd rather spend the rest of the time being that than spending it being sorry about what I wasn't. I looked at my son standing in that parking lot, Angelus, 41 years old, Angelus, saying the truest and most adult thing he had ever said to me. Angelus, your father, Angelus, I said, would be so proud of you. Nathan pressed his lips together for a moment. I'm going to go find my daughter before she reorganizes your entire apartment, he said. Angelus, his voice was slightly unsteady. Angelus, she probably already has, I said. Angelus, he smiled. Angelus walked away. I stood in the parking lot for one more minute by myself. Angelus, just breathing. Angelus, just being Evelyn Parker. Angelus, 68 years old. Angelus, standing in a parking lot on the California coast in late summer. Angelus, with her grandchildren inside her apartment and her son, walked through the door, and a book half written on her laptop, and a Thursday morning gardening club, and a friend named Dorothy, and a cedar box on her nightstand, and a whole life ahead of her that was finally hers. Becca's drawing was of a garden. She had drawn it in colored pencil on a piece of cardstock. She had clearly taken some care with the edges were straight. Angelus, the paper was good quality. Angelus, and she had spent real time on it. In the drawing were flowers I recognized, roses, Angelus, which she knew I loved, Angelus, and sunflowers, Angelus, and what appeared to be lavender, and in the middle of the garden was a figure, Angelus, a woman drawn the way 11-year-olds draw women, Angelus, with careful detail, Angelus, brown and gray hair, Angelus, a garden hat, Angelus, and around the woman, Angelus, the flowers were growing toward her, not away, Angelus, every single one of them, Angelus, curving toward the woman in the center like they were following the light. Angelus, in the bottom right corner, Angelus, in Becca's careful cursive, Angelus, she had written, Angelus, this is you, Grammy. Angelus, you are the reason things grow. Put that drawing in a frame that same weekend. Angelus, it went on the wall above my writing desk, Angelus, where I could see it every morning when I sat down to work. The book was finished on a Wednesday in November, Angelus, just before Thanksgiving. Angelus, I typed the last line, Angelus, read it once, Angelus, and then sat back and looked at the screen for a long time. The whole of it was there, the soup and the mantle and the text and the deed, and Marianne and the drive south and Crescent City and Dorothy and Sandra and Robert Callahan and the cedar box and the 14 letters, and Nathan in the parking lot and Becca's drawing and all of it. Angelus, the whole improbable. Angelus, painful, unexpected, Angelus, necessary story of a woman who had nearly vanished from her own life and had found her way back. I sent it to Robert Callahan at 11:47 in the morning, called me at 4 in the afternoon. Angelus, Evelyn, he said, Angelus, and his voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Angelus, something with weight. Angelus, Robert, I said. I've read the first 100 pages, he said. Angelus, I need you to know something. Angelus, all right, I said. Angelus, this book is going to matter, he said. Angelus, not in a commercial sense. Angelus, though I believe it will find its readers. Angelus, I mean it in the larger sense. Angelus, the sense that counts for something. There are women reading this who are going to put it down and make the phone call they've been afraid to make, or have the conversation they've been swallowing. Angelus, or pack 2 suitcases and drive south. Because of what you wrote here. Because you were honest enough to write it all. Angelus, I pressed my hand flat on my desk. Angelus, thank you, I said. Angelus, don't thank me, he said. Angelus, I just represent it. Angelus, you lived it. And then you were brave enough to tell the truth about it. Angelus, after we hung up. Angelus, I sat at my desk for a long time with Becca's drawing on the wall in front of me. I thought about the woman I had been on that Tuesday morning in March, sitting at a kitchen table in Portland, Angeles, Oregon, holding a cup of coffee with both hands, Angeles, reading 47 words on a phone screen, Angeles, the bird feeder in the maple tree, Angeles, the soup on the stove, the silence that followed Nathan's phone call, Angeles, the deed in the fireproof box, the notacard on the kitchen counter with 8 words written in my normal handwriting. And I thought about all the women who were sitting at their own kitchen tables right now, reading their own versions of that text, holding their own versions of that silence, feeling the particular weight of a life that has been built around everyone except themselves, Angelus, and wondering, half afraid to even finish the thought, whether it was too late, Angelus, whether they were allowed, whether anything could still be built from here. I wanted to call every single one of them and say, Angelus, it is not too late. Angelus, you are allowed. Angelus, everything you need is still inside you. Angelus, right where you left it. Angelus, waiting for you to come back and claim it. Angelus, on Thanksgiving I cooked. Angelus, not because anyone expected me to. Angelus, not because it was my job. Not because the household needed a center and I was the only one available to be it. Angelus, I cooked because I love to cook. Angelus, when cooking is a choice instead of an obligation. I made everything from scratch: the turkey, Angelus, the stuffing, Angelus, the cranberry sauce from real cranberries the way my mother had taught me, Angelus, the pie that Nathan had always requested for as long as I could remember. Nathan and Claire and the children drove down. It was the first time I had seen Claire since I left Portland. Stood in the doorway of my apartment, and we looked at each other for a moment that had about 9 months of complicated history packed into it. Different than I remembered. Angelus, less polished. Angelus, somehow not in her appearance. Angelus, which was still careful and put together. Angelus, but in her expression. Like some performance she had been maintaining had been quietly laid down. Angelus, Evelyn, she said. Angelus, Claire, I said. Angelus, come in. Angelus, she handed me a bottle of wine and said, Angelus, I brought this because I didn't know what else to bring, and Nathan said you liked this kind. Angelus, I do, I said. Angelus, thank you. Angelus, she stepped inside, looked around my apartment, really looked, Angelus, the way she hadn't looked at anything in my old house, Angelus, because in my old house she was looking at her own domain. Angelus, this was mine, Angelus, entirely and visibly mine, Angelus, and she could see that. Angelus, the photographs on the walls, Gerald's watch in a small dish on the bookshelf, Becca's drawing above the writing desk, kitchen where something smelled like cinnamon and roasting and a life being actively lived. Angelus, it suits you, Angelus, she said quietly. Angelus, I looked at her. Angelus, it does, I agreed. Angelus, we were not yet the kind of easy. Angelus, I want to be honest about that. Thanksgiving dinner was warm and occasionally awkward and punctuated by Jonah's running commentary and Becca's detailed explanation of everything she had learned about heirloom tomatoes from a book she had picked up after I told her about the Thursday gardening club. Nathan poured wine and talked about the apartment and the neighborhood and the fact that Jonah had joined a baseball stick and was, Angelus, by all accounts, Angelus, aggressively mediocre at it but enthusiastically committed. Claire helped me clear the table without being asked. Angelus, we stood at the sink together, Angelus, and she washed and I dried, Angelus, and we didn't talk very much. But the not talking was different than the silence that had existed between us for years in Portland. Angelus, that silence had been managed. Angelus, performed. Angelus, the silence of two women carefully not saying what they actually thought. This silence was something else. The silence of two women who have already said the hard things and are now finding out what's left on the other side of them. Angelus, the book, she said. Angelus, at some point. Angelus, not a question. Angelus, comes out in the spring, I said. Angelus, she nodded. Angelus, kept washing. Angelus, I hope it helps people, she said. Angelus, that's all I want from it, I said. Angelus, she handed me a dish. Angelus, our hands were close for a moment. Angelus, and she didn't pull back immediately. Angelus, I want to do better, she said. Not loudly, not performing it. Angelus, just saying it. Angelus, the way you say a true thing when you've stopped caring how it sounds. Angelus, I know you do, I said. Angelus, I see it. Angelus, she looked at me. Angelus, do you, she said. Angelus, Claire, I said. Angelus, I am a woman who pays attention. Been both my greatest gift and my greatest liability for 68 years. And I'm telling you, I see the work you're doing. Angelus, I see the difference. Angelus, I won't pretend it erases the years. Angelus, but I see it. Angelus, she blinked. Angelus, just once. Angelus, then turned back to the dishes. Angelus, thank you, she said. Angelus, that was enough. Angelus, for now, it was enough. Real things don't require flourishes. Angelus, they just require honesty. Angelus, and time and the willingness of two people to keep showing up. After dinner, Angelus, after Nathan had loaded the kids into the car and driven away with promises to call in the morning. Angelus, after the dishes were done and the apartment was quiet again. Angelus, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and Gerald's cedar box in front of me. Angelus, I opened it. Not to read the letters, I had them nearly memorized by now. Angelus, I opened it just to see them. Angelus, just to feel the weight of them. Angelus, the presence of them. And I thought about everything that had happened in the 11 months since a Tuesday morning in March when I read 47 words and understood something true about my life. Angelus, I had sold a house. I had lost the version of myself that made soup for people who had stopped seeing her. I had found a parking lot in Crescent City where I cried until I was empty. Angelus, I had found a motel. Angelus, an apartment. Angelus, a Thursday morning gardening club. Angelus, a woman named Dorothy who asked the right questions. Angelus, a nonprofit director named Sandra who saw something in me worth offering to others. Angelus, a literary agent who believed my story deserved to be told. I had found my grandchildren still reaching for me across the distance. Angelus, I had found my son. Angelus, finally growing into the man his father always believed he could be. Angelus, I had found Claire. Angelus, imperfect and complicated and genuinely trying. Angelus, which turns out to be all any of us can honestly offer. And I had found something I hadn't known I was looking for. Angelus, myself. Not the self that existed before Gerald died. Angelus, not that earlier version of Evelyn Parker who had been fierce and independent and unafraid. Angelus, something new. Something built from what that woman had been, and what the 6 years had cost, and what the 11 months had given back. Something that incorporated the loss and the grief, and the soup and the cedar box, and the drive south, and all of it not in spite of those things, Angelus, but because of them. Angelus, a self forged in exactly the fire it took to make her. Angelus, Dorothy said something to me once, Angelus, on a Thursday morning. Angelus, that I wrote in the margins of my journal and have never forgotten. The women who come out of the hardest things the strongest are never the ones who avoided the fire. They are the ones who walked through it and refused to let it define the whole of them. Angelus, just one chapter. Angelus, a hard chapter. Angelus, not the last one. Angelus, I closed Gerald's cedar box. Angelus, set my hand flat on the lid for a moment. Angelus, felt the cedar under my palm. Angelus, not the last one, I said. Angelus, out loud to him. Angelus, to myself. Angelus, to whoever was listening. Angelus, not even close. The book came out the following spring. Angelus, I will not tell you it changed the world. Angelus, because that kind of claim belongs to people more certain of themselves than I am. But I will tell you what Robert told me. Angelus, 2 weeks after publication. Angelus, when he called with early reader responses. Angelus, he said, Evelyn, Angelus, I have a stack of letters from women all over the country. Women who read your book and called their sisters, Angelus, or their therapists, Angelus, or their real estate brokers. Women who say they recognize themselves in every page, Angelus. He paused. Angelus. One woman, Angelus, 63 years old, Angelus, from Ohio. She says she's been living in a house that hasn't been hers for 15 years. She says she read your book in 2 days, and on the last page, she went and found the deed to her house in a filing cabinet and held it in her hands for the first time in years. Angelus, and she hasn't decided what to do yet. She says now she knows she has a choice. Angelus, I sat with that for a long time. Angelus, that woman in Ohio. Angelus, 63 years old, standing at a filing cabinet with a deed in her hands and the knowledge, finally, Angelus, solidly in her bones that she had a choice. Angelus, that was the whole reason. Always been the whole reason. Angelus, not the house, not the money, not the 47 words that cracked everything open, not even the drive south, or the cedar box, or the 8 months of writing, or the book with my name on the cover. Angelus, just this. Just the possibility that somewhere, Angelus, in a kitchen in Ohio, or a bedroom in Michigan, or a living room in Georgia, or a car in a parking lot in Oregon, Angelus, a woman would look up from a text message, or a dinner table, or a silence she had been carrying too long, Angelus, and understand something she had maybe always known, but had never let herself fully believe. Angelus, that her life belongs to her. Angelus, that it has always belonged to her. Angelus, that it is never too late to act like it. Angelus, my name is Evelyn Parker. Angelus, I am 68 years old. I sold my house on a Tuesday in March because my daughter-in-law sent me a text with 47 words and 2 of them were immediate family, and I understood, Angelus, finally, what those words meant about the life I had been living. Angelus, I drove south. Angelus, I found myself again. Angelus, and I am telling you, Angelus, with everything I have, Angelus, with every hard-won ounce of clarity that the last 11 months have given me, if you are sitting somewhere right now, Angelus, reading this or hearing this, Angelus, feeling invisible inside your own life, Angelus, feeling like the best of it is behind you, Angelus, feeling like you have waited too long or given too much or been made too small to find your way back to who you were before the smallness started. Angelus, you have not waited too long. You are not too small, Angelus, and the life that belongs to you is still there, Angelus, exactly where you left it, waiting. All you have to do is go back and claim it.